Hello everyone and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Tuesday, January 3rd, and hope you all having a wonderful day so far, as well as a great start to your new year. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. First up, we're going to head over to Allen, where he will meet with Mike Nelson, Vice President of IoT Security at DigiCert, to talk about DigiCert's new Digital Trust Survey. Then, Allen will sit down with Dr. Victor Lee, Vice President of Developer Experience at TigerGraph, to talk about TigerGraph's newly announced Visual Graph Analytics and GraphML features on TigerGraph Cloud, its fully managed graph database as a service. Then, we go to AWS reInvent, where Mitch spoke to John Willis of Costly and Damon Edwards, Senior Director of Product at PagerDuty, about the role that they played in the creation and expansion of DevOps, as well as what the two are up to now. Then we go to Mitch, where he will meet with Alan Shreve, CEO of ngrok, to discuss ngrok's recent $50 million Series A funding, led by Lightspeed Ventures Partners, with participation from Cotu. Then we have two episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Alkira CEO, Amir Khan, as Amir explains why networking in the multi-cloud computing era requires a different approach. Then, Mike interviews Rowland Grouse, Head of Product for Agoric, as Rowland explains how decentralized blockchain applications will be built using standard JavaScript tools. Then we go back to AWS reInvent, where Alan spoke with Guillermo Rauch, CEO and founder of Vercel, to discuss how Vercel and AWS work together to accelerate innovation, as well as share more about Vercel's recent release of Next.js 13. Also at AWS reInvent, Alan spoke with Christine Puccio, Vice President of Global Cloud Ecosystem and Alliances at JFrog, to discuss how JFrog expands its partnerships with cloud service providers and how cloud marketplaces can ease procurement cycles and costs. Then we go to KubeCon Cloud Native Con North America, where Mitch spoke with Shantanu Gattani, Senior Director of Product Management at Tenable, about how Tenable shifted from IT vulnerability management to exposure management with its new Tenable One offering. Also at KubeCon Cloud Native Con North America, Mitch spoke with Justin Rioch, Field CTO and Chief Evangelist at Gradle, about the importance of developer productivity engineering in Gradle Enterprise, a tool that provides acceleration, observation, and analytics technology to remove unnecessary toil on the developer. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
CISO Talk. To hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. My next guest on Techstrong TV is my friend Mike Nelson. Mike has been doing Techstrong TV interviews with me, I think before we had Techstrong TV. Going back to DigiCert conferences, user conferences, and he's always up for an interview. Hey, Mike, welcome back. How are you?
Alan, it's always fun to be with you, and always appreciate getting on and having these fun discussions with you. So thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. Mike, we're going to talk about digital trust today, and I know you guys had recently done a survey and report on it. But before we do that, I not everyone out here maybe is familiar with DigiCert, even though it's sort of an 800-pound gorilla in your space. Why don't we level set that? Give us
Sure.
a bit of the DigiCert story.
Hey, I always like talking about DigiCert and what we're doing, so I'm happy to do that. So we're DigiCert. I'm the Vice President of IoT Security at DigiCert, and I lead our go-to-market and efforts that we do in that space. DigiCert, at the core of our mission is what we call digital trust. And as the world becomes more connected, Alan, and your audience knows that everything in our lives is becoming connected. And as connectivity continues to increase, it's important that we engage in that connectivity in a secure way. And that really is the mission of DigiCert, digital trust. And so whether you're engaging in online transactions, whether you're signing digital documents, whether you're signing code or software or firmware that's going to an IoT device, or whether you're enabling a smart home device to monitor your temperature inside your home or to open your garage door, all of that connectivity creates great improvements in our life, but it needs to be secure. And DigiCert has a wide suite of products that we offer our customers to help businesses and consumers engage in that connectivity in a secure way.
I love it. Fantastic. And you even included your background there. We're ready to rock and roll.
All right, let's go.
So Mike, we talk about digital trust, right? Let's baseline that, and then, we'll connect DigiCert to digital trust, and then we'll get into the survey if that's good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, we've talked about the growing numbers of connected device, right? The lens that I typically look at security, just because of the role that I play at DigiCert, is through the lens of connected devices. And, the threat landscape there is just growing immensely, right? I mean, smart devices are popping up. Your cars are connected, smart homes. I wear medical devices on me that are connected. Most family members, people know, or most people have a family member, I should say, that is using a connected device. And so the connectivity is just growing rapidly. I mean, you think about what happened even during COVID and how, enterprises had to shift from we're securing the walls within the walls of our enterprise now to thinking about remote employees and remote connectivity. And how do you establish secure connections with employees that are around the globe working from home? How do you sign documents in a digital way? Document signing grew dramatically through COVID as businesses had to figure out how to execute contracts and sign things digitally. And so that connectivity and the way that we're engaging online is continuing to expand. And, at DigiCert, we consider ourselves an innovator and an industry leader in digital trust. And so we're constantly monitoring that connectivity and coming up with solutions and expanding our product portfolio to help us solve more of those digital trust challenges that our customers are facing.
Absolutely. Look, we're seeing it here, Mike, beyond even security. We call it the DevOps of things, and the edge, of course, has become a huge new frontier. And the yin and the yang, the good and the bad of all of these new devices and edges and computing stacks, if you will, is it gives us more. We're more connected. We're able to do more, see more, coordinate more. But every single thing we add adds yet another attack surface, yet another vector. And so we're constantly, I mean, it's why we can't have nice things, right? For all of these great things, we wind up saying, okay, well, what do we got to do to secure them? Because someone's liable to use it the wrong way.
Yeah. You raise an interesting one, Alan. I have a question for you. I mean, how do you think, I think the DevOps space is it's an area that I think needs a lot of attention right now. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. I mean, do you feel like what you're seeing is enhancements and improvements there? Or do you feel like the DevOps process still needs, we're talking generally here, but how are you feeling about that space?
Well, talk about turning the tables.
Well, I'm just curious.
I'll tell you.
So it's interesting because, I've been in security 25 years, started DevOps.com in 2013, started 2014. When I first started, I got into it because of security. I thought that DevOps represented a way for us to do better in security. And it has, right? This whole rise of so-called DevSecOps, shift left, and all of the things involved in it. Making security tools for non-security people, for developers and testers. It's all good, all goodness, and it's increased the level of the quality of the software we release. I think Mark Andreessen's software is eating the world has come to pass. Software has eaten the world. DevOps is helping digest it, right? That's how we do software now. That's how we do it. But I also think the mission of DevOps has greatly expanded. It's no longer just bringing dev and ops and breaking down that silo. It is the CI/CD pipeline. It is software as a factory, but it doesn't end at deployment, right? It's those feedback loops and iterations and that infinity loop that you often see with DevOps. It's real, and as we're moving to things, right? Things today, I mean, look, think back, Mike, when I was in security 20 years ago. When we talk about connected things, we were talking about simple like SCADA devices that were open close. That's not what things are today. I mean, there are a lot of things that are still open close, but that's not what they are today. Today, these things are much smarter, much more capable. They have much more headroom on them to do computing on. They run more sophisticated software that's being built with DevOps, but they have to be built and designed by design to do secure functionality. And how do we secure these things?
Yeah.
Well, we need DigiCert's mission is front and center there, right?
Yeah, and that's why I ask you that. Is I'm glad to hear that you. I love the things that you're talking about and how the role of DevOps is evolving and the challenges that they're solving are growing and becoming more complex and challenging. DigiCert is doing a lot of work in the DevOps space to bring, we have a very robust signing manager that integrates into workflows for DevOps and CI/CD. That the things that you're talking about there are so important, and it's a big focus of DigiCert right now. And good DevOps, as you said, really helps. It's the starting point for good security once things are deployed, and you have to have that. And I think that as we shift now, maybe we can. This survey that we did recently, we called it's the 2022 State of Digital Trust Survey that was conducted by DigiCert. We learned a lot, some DevOps, but just at a high level, I think the way we approached the survey was pretty neat. We didn't just talk to businesses. We interviewed over 400 businesses, and we were targeting individuals who were involved in security, who were involved in DevOps, IT security, OT security, but over 400 from organizations over 1,000. So I think a good sample size, globally distributed. But then we did the same thing with consumers. So we went out and we talked to consumers and asked them their feelings of where things are with digital trust. And same thing, global distribution, age distribution, gender, political affiliation. We had a wide range that we cast our net to. And it was really interesting to compare where enterprises think they are with digital trust and how much their consumers trust them compared to what the consumers actually said about how much they're trusting the businesses that they're engaging in. It was quite startling, some of the things that we learned there. And what we learned is there's a disconnect, Alan. There's enterprises trend to think that they're doing better with digital trust than their consumers actually believe they're really doing, and that's quite startling to me. But it's a data point that I think enterprises really need to pay attention to, because in the world of security, it's really easy to think that everything's going well, that you're doing the right things until something bad happens. And I think too many times consumers are being hit by cyber breaches. And when that happens, their trust is lost, and it creates skepticism, and it creates a lack of trust for them to engage with those enterprises. And so, that disconnect between enterprises and what they're thinking and how good they're doing and what consumers are feeling is a really interesting disconnect.
Absolutely. Mike, it's funny, you're talking about enterprises and consumers. It's almost like a dumbbell equation, right? you got these two big things here and the bar connecting them. But is there a bar connecting them? Like what? I mean, there are some things that I guess are universal, right? That apply to both. But is there enough? I mean, so when you look at it as DigiCert, obviously two different markets. Are they two different products altogether? Two different priority lists?
How
good
much
question.
is overlapped? How much can I reuse?
Yeah.
Right?
So there certainly is overlap. I mean, I think one commonality between them is they're both attacked. Enterprises get attacked and consumers get attacked.
Right.
Our survey found that 57% of consumers have experienced a cyber breach. And that could be anything from account hacks, password exposure, financial data being compromised or stolen. But 57% of consumers have experienced a cyber breach. The number I don't think is quite as high for enterprises, but many of them have. And when enterprises get breached, those things make the news, right? And so
And it's big money.
I think that for us, the fact that consumer awareness is being heightened on a cyber front, the fact that 57% have experienced breaches. Another really compelling stat that we got from the survey said that of those consumers that we interviewed, 87% of them said following a breach in trust, they would switch companies. They would switch to a different vendor.
Let me jump in.
Okay. So first of all, I think that 57% number represents consumers who either admit to a breach or know they had a breach. I would bet the number of actual consumers who in fact did have a breach is probably closer to 85% or 90%, and they just don't even know it.
Yeah.
Right? Because maybe it didn't hit them in the pocketbook or, it didn't rise to that level, but they've been breached. I mean, it's happened. Even if we define it as a password steal,
right? Yep. They've been breached.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how many
their
times
stuff has been leaked?
Yeah. I mean, how many times I use a good password keeper, and it's common when I log in that says, hey, there was a data breach at this company. Your credentials may have been compromised. Most consumers
even
are
if
not
the
paying
password
attention to
keeper itself, right? The password keeper itself might have been broken into. But
Exactly.
yeah, I mean,
most consumers
when Equifax had
even
300 million.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I
think the number's much higher.
Yeah.
Number two,
and this kind of bums me out, but as much as we don't want to admit it, the public's memory or Equifax got breached today. Everybody, Equifax, right? Until Experian got breached, then they forgot about Equifax. Our memories collectively as consumers are very short. So yes, they all say, "Oh, I would never. I'm going to really think about doing business with a company that was breached." Until the next time Macy's is running a sale, then they forget Macy's had a breach. And I don't mean to pick on Macy's.
Yes. No. Yep.
But that's how consumers are. They're fickle. They're really fickle. And if we look at stock prices of public companies who've had breaches, generally speaking, a year later, it's a blip on the radar.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I agree. Consumers have short memory on that kind of stuff, and consumers trust. And I say this a lot, but I feel consumers have the right to trust, which puts more of the burden on enterprises and manufacturers who are making these devices or building these systems to make sure that they're doing secure DevOps, that they're integrating security into the way that they do business. To your point that you made earlier,
quality.
Yeah, quality has to be associated with security. It's like, the old seatbelt in the car analogy. It's like, at what point are we going to start requiring good security to be baked into the DNA of our connected world? We have to do it. And I think
I'm sorry, Mike, I don't mean to cut you off, But I think the onus lies on the companies. Let's talk about cars, for example.
Yeah,
It's not seatbelts anymore. It's the 400
exactly.
different processors in
Yeah,
the
the
steering
ECUs
system
in the
alone.
vehicle. Yep.
Right, and the 7 million lines of code and all of that. You know, where you can, I think it was the TV show Tehran on Apple TV, right? Where they were able to remotely control the brakes on a car.
Yeah.
Because it's all controlled by chips, right?
Yep.
And and all these cars are connected.
Yeah.
So you can't expect the consumer to say, geez, I hope my BMW is not hackable.
Yeah.
You can't
Exactly.
put it on the consumer to say, I hope my pacemaker is not hackable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, I think the survey tells us that consumers are starting to pay attention to cyber. If your company is involved in a breach, consumers are much less likely to do business with you. Another really cool stat, 47% of consumers who have experienced a breach with a company moved away from that company. Almost 50%. So if you're experiencing a breach, you are losing customers. You're losing their trust, and that trust causes consumers to move away from you. And so, message to enterprise today or manufacturer, whatever, if you're building products and selling them to consumers, consumers are paying attention to security. They're willing to switch brands. They're willing to leave you if you do not honor the trust that they are giving you.
I don't disagree. And Mike, the other thing is, there are breaches and there are breaches. My debit card got breached. They sent me a new one. My password on my football league got breached. No big deal. I changed passwords. But when we start talking about cars, medical devices, some of these other connected devices, whether it be critical infrastructure or life and death kind of stuff, these are not, oh my God, I'm just going to switch brands. These are life-altering events, right?
Yep. It's hard to take a cardiac device that's embedded in your chest and go replace it with a new one. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my. Yeah. I need an update.
Yeah.
But a lot of those cardiac devices embedded in your chest are updatable now.
Yep, they are
online, and this is, it's scary, quite frankly. So, I think we made this point. What other good stuff in the survey do you want to bring up?
Well, I think that I've highlighted some of the key points, and enterprises need to pay attention and be aware that consumers are paying attention to it. And the trust that they have in you, first of all, they're skeptical and they don't think you're doing as well as you're doing, but they're also willing to walk away from you if you lose their trust. And that trust is something that can be established and can be maintained if you're doing the right things. And so, I think that the last thing, we have a handful of recommendations for our audience based on the findings. And the first one is something that we've kind of touched on, Alan, but it's really to make digital trust a strategic imperative for your company. And I talk about it, I say, bake it into the DNA of the way you operate. Your DevOps process, your deployment process, your management, your ongoing management. Everything that you're doing, you need to think about security because your business is becoming more and more connected, everything that you're doing. And so you need to make sure that you have a strategic imperative that says digital trust is a top priority for our company, and then have the right resources who have autonomy to make decisions and do the right things to actually change things when you're doing things in a way that could compromise the trust of your consumers. And I think we're starting to see a shift, more product security teams, IT, you're seeing more CISOs and leaders in organizations actually emerge. And I think that's a good thing, but I think we still have work to do there.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Yeah, well, I was just going to move to
Next one.
The next recommendation, and I've talked about it here, but it's don't pretend like your consumers are not paying attention. If you think your consumers are blind to cyber, you're wrong. What we have found, to your point, Alan, I think even higher, but 57% have said we have been breached. And following that breach, we lost trust with that company, and it compelled us to move to another company. If you want to lose customers, lose their trust. And if you don't, fortify your organization and your enterprise and do the right things. And that really gets down another challenge that I'm sure you're aware of, but the enterprises that we interviewed, one of the questions we asked was, what are the challenges for doing security the right way? And many of them responded and said lack of talent, lack of resources who know how to do it. And so when you don't know how to do it, and this is a shameless plug for companies like DigiCert, reach out to experts who know how to help you navigate some of those challenges, whether it's establishing a secure DevOps process, whether it's figuring out how to provision certificates to connected devices in the field, or how to set up a process for secure code signing and managing credentials so you have rights management and access management and all those great things. If you don't know how to do it, there are organizations who can help you do it in a way that's controlled and secure and help you grow into that. And finally, own the burden of security. Don't pretend like it's someone else's responsibility. Organizations need to act with responsibility to say, this is our problem. It's not our consumer's problem. It's not my neighbor's problem. This is our problem. And as soon as you take that accountability and that ownership, then you can start doing those other things like enabling or embedding security into the way you operate as a business. And all of those things are going to result in customers that trust you and a happy customer base. And so I think that's the takeaway.
I think that is. I think number 3, Mike, is number 1. Right? When you realize it's your responsibility and then you start taking responsibility, that trust comes with it. And you know what? And we're running out of time, but trust is something that predates cyber. When you bought Heinz ketchup, you bought Heinz ketchup because it wasn't the store brand that was watery or full of sugar. It was really good ketchup. That's a form of trust, right? You trusted the quality of that brand, of that product. Today, cyber is part of that trust equation, and I think that's what people need to take out. Mike, for people who want to get more information, where do they go on this?
Yeah, our website is our website is digicert.com, and you can find, we have links in there where you can go and you can dive in. A lot of other findings that we had about enterprises and how they're handling security, problems they're having, and consumers. So please visit our website, digicert.com, and you'll be able to find a link to more information on it.
I love it, man. Hey, I appreciate you improvising here. For those who don't know, Mike we had a little internet connection problem, and we did this on his phone. So yes, we could use it on an Apple commercial shot on an iPhone. But Mike, I appreciate it. Hope to see you soon, man, and stay well.
Awesome. Alan, always fun to connect with you. Thanks for having me on.
All righty. Mike Nelson, DigiCert, here on Techstrong TV. Go check out their digital trust survey, and we'll be back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. Our guest in this segment for Techstrong is Dr. Victor Lee, and Victor is with Tigergraph. We're going to find out all about them in a moment. But first, let's welcome Dr. Victor Lee. Hey, Victor, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you, Alan. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure to have you on. So as I mentioned, it's Dr. Victor Lee. Before we jump into Tigergraph and what we want to cover today, Victor, why don't you give us, our listeners, our viewers, a little bit of background on kind of your own personal story?
Okay, sure. I actually started out as an electrical engineer, working in Silicon Valley as a chip designer when it was about the silicon rather than the software. And then got married, and my wife gave me a good reason why we should move out of California for her job. So I did. And for a while, I was out of tech. And I was actually running a school program, and besides teaching, I was doing record keeping on Excel. And from the demands of doing that job, I realized, wow, I really wish I could somehow join the information from the record in one table to another table. Now, those of you that know databases, well, you said, well, yeah. Thing is, I had not studied databases. I just sort of inferred that's what I wish I could do as a user. And then we eventually settled in Ohio, and I went back to school and furthered my education in computer science, fell in love with databases, went into a PhD program. My advisor was working on graphs, and we'll tell you what I mean by graphs. And so I ended up studying graph data mining, graph databases and graph data mining. And then I got hired to join TigerGraph, where early on got to work on a product that is giving people what I find really exciting, taking information and organizing it in the really logical way and helping them to answer the questions that they really want. And this new type of graph structure is really giving people the performance and the analytics capability that they're not getting with more traditional tabular databases.
Love it. I mean, this is quite a story, right? In tech, hardware, silicon designer, out of tech, academian, and another career launched by Excel. Right? Go figure. But that is quite a story, Victor. It sounds like you've got maybe a book in there somewhere to write.
Well, I am working on a book, but not
on your autobiography, exactly. So, but we teased it a little bit. What makes graph database technology so enticing?
Yeah, let me explain the term graph, because it's an unfortunate choice, perhaps. It comes from mathematicians hundreds of years ago, or at least 100 years ago, decided that when they want to model an abstract concept of a network of a point and connections between the points, they called that a graph, not a network. And so, because again, mathematicians developed the field originally, when you have a data structure that's points and the relationships, they call that a graph database. And so TigerGraph has a graph database. We model, think of a social network like Facebook, like LinkedIn. You have records about people. But it's really important to know who is connected to who is friends with whom, or who works for what company. Company is a different type of entity. So you can have multiple types of entities. When you have that real emphasis on the relationships, then you're saying, wow, I want to think of that as a graph. I want to store the data as a graph, and I want to analyze it as a graph. And so graph databases are designed to store information a little differently than tabular databases, so that you can really accelerate the following the links, not following hundreds of links maybe that are adjacent to you, and then going multiple levels deep to say, who is your friend of a friend of a friend? You can't get that kind of performance if you're working with tables. You have to design it as a graph.
Love it. And so that's definitely the allure, right? To see these connections in ways that we never could have imagined before. It kind of lights up whole different layers. The other thing, and I'm no expert on graph databases, but the other thing about them is from a scalability perspective, I understand, it is pretty darn scalable, right? I mean, the amount of data and so forth.
Everybody has massive amounts of data available to them these days. Storage has gotten pretty cheap. Companies routinely have terabytes, some have petabytes of data, and they want to be able to make use of that, not just have it in storage, but what can I learn from that data? How can I use that to help me make better decisions, to make predictions? So Tigergraph saw that need. So our founders came from the traditional database world like Teradata and Oracle, where they know how to design high performance enterprise scalable databases. But we married that with graph technology and graph concepts. So we have the massively parallel processing, distributed database technology that makes those previous generation databases scalable and enterprise quality and performant. And we just transfer that to graph concepts. So we're really proud. We think we have definitely the first and I believe still the only graph database that can handle that terabyte scale and perform at speed.
You know, we, just to bring it home for the audience, so here at Techstrong TV, right, we've been doing Techstrong TV like since COVID started. So I want to say April of 2020 we started this. And, you know, in 2.5 years or so, I don't know how many thousands of videos like this interview we've done, literally thousands. And then we store them, and storing them and streaming them, you know, is obviously an expensive piece of work. But I will tell you that in looking to make them better searchable and illuminate some of the connections, right? It's hard. It's hard finding a database that does that kind of job at that scale, right? And especially with video. Video is a whole different problem child because you might as well have encrypted data in there. The database doesn't really know, other than whatever tags you want to put in, right? What's actually in that video. So if I want to do a video search, I mean, searching on our graph databases, well, that's a typical sort of tag that'll pop up. But if I wanted to say, I wonder what videos we've done with people from Ohio. That's lost in the thousands of videos in there. And I'm hoping one day we have even that kind of stuff, but it's hard. Anyway, another thing about the whole graph database world, though, is like so much today, you know, it really sits on top of this open source movement where there are open source graph databases that, look, you want to experiment and play and you're a do it yourself kind of person, DIY kind of person, have at it. And if I've interviewed Tigergraph a few times. You guys, offer that, you're part of that community as well, yes?
We have a free version of Tigergraph that is available for people to use. Other companies also have free or community versions. And, maybe about 10 years ago, there's started an Apache project for the Gremlin language running on top of the Tinkerpop framework. So I'd say that's the real, truly open source project. But I have to say it kind of shows its age, and, it doesn't have the ease of use or scalability that you find in the commercial products. And so while the graph database community has definitely made ways for people to get started for free, we have our Tigergraph Cloud service where there is a free tier. There's also an effort for a standard query language. That's one of the things that helped SQL grow, is
Absolutely.
that no matter which vendor you go with, you're all using some slight variation of the standard SQL language. Graph hasn't had that yet, but I'm on the standards committee that next year is going to introduce the GQL standard.
Right. I think we did an interview on that, on the upcoming GQL. And that's a sign of maturity in my mind, right? And it's funny, I actually just finished writing an article for the end of year rehab looking at DevOps. And really for me, that was the big theme this year, is the continuing maturity of so much of the technology that DevOps and cloud native and so forth, digital transformation, is based on. And I think that is a missing piece, right? I think, quite frankly, getting back to the open source thing, and obviously there's open source and then there's free software. Free isn't free isn't beer, right? And one of the things that has really helped in the open source community are foundations like Apache, like the Linux Foundation, that allow sort of community-wide, industry-wide co-opetition, if you will, right? To come up with things like a graph query language that'll benefit everyone, right? That rising tide will lift all of the boats. So really looking forward to that. You mentioned the hosted TigerGraph product, commercial product, and that's really what we want to focus in on today. TigerGraph, I think one of the interviews I had done, we had gone through the amount of users and petabytes of information stored and all that. It's remarkable. But really, I mean, that's the secret sauce, right? TigerGraph offers a hosted version where you don't have to worry about keeping that database from an infrastructure point of view.
Right. Yeah.
Up and running.
We call that TigerGraph Cloud to not be mysterious about what it is. It's a hosted on the cloud database as a service. So we take care of the management and the infrastructure. You just load your data and go to work. And it has the scalability. It's based on the same core technology that our original on-premises database 10 years ago was based on. And we just, as you mentioned, I think at the beginning, introduced version 3.8, which has two new exciting additions. In addition to the database itself, there's TigerGraph Insights for, in an intuitive way, building business intelligence dashboards. So you don't have to be a developer, a coder, and anybody can build a dashboard similar in concept to, Tableau or Power BI, but really tailored for Graph.
Really? Okay.
And integration with machine learning. And that was, particularly sort of my baby. I previously had up the machine learning group. And so that was our new entry to really bring data scientists who've seen, they understand the value of Graph, but they're not necessarily, again, they don't want to have to learn a Graph query language or a lot of detail. They just want to put the data to use in the way that they're used to doing it. And so so each of these products, Machine Learning Workbench, makes graph analytics easier for data scientists, and TigerGraph Insights makes it easier for business analysts, less technical people to do graph analytics.
Interesting. It's funny for data scientists who don't want to learn the query language. We recently were reminded of this. We were using, I don't even want to mention the name of a product we use here, and the information locked away in it is game-changing. The problem is I feel like I'm back in Crystal Reports in 1999. You got to write queries to get this stuff. And I know it's there. It's just getting it is like you got to go hire someone who that's what they do. They're writing queries to give us the goods, if you will. And so we can't lose sight of how important that is. So these dashboards, is it sort of like a low-code, no-code way of just getting the kind of views that you want? Is fair to say that?
You can, and in the world of graph analytics, you've got your two major flavors. Do you want to see the graph, which I nickname sticks and balls, like probably you and I know Tinker Toys. I think not everybody these days, but actually visualizing the nodes and connections, or just show me a pie chart, just show me a bar chart, do the analysis and summarize the results for me. You can do either. We have a way to drag and drop to build queries.
Wow.
We have, again, ways that are, if you're familiar with Tableau or Power BI, similar format. We've partnered with those companies, and so you can use those, but there's still, I have to say, there's a little bit of friction because they were designed for tabular data, and there's that step of how do I go from graph to tabular? There's a transition, and we're working with them to smooth out that transition. But in it also, if you want to do real native graph analytics, that's the value of tyGraph Insights. It just takes you directly to the graph source. And one nice thing about graph is, let's not think about the query language. If you can see a graph, if the things are labeled, oh, that's a person. Oh, that means friend. Oh, that means works for. Anybody can so ask the question they want by just pointing to things. Find this pattern for me, or tell me how often that pattern occurs. Let's not worry about query language. Just if you can see it and explain it, we'll produce it for you.
Love it. Good stuff. The other thing you mentioned was ML, machine learning. I mentioned earlier I was just writing this recap of DevOps and what I'm excited about. I really believe that after 3-4 more years of just hearing a lot of spouted nonsense around ML and AI, that we are now entering a very productive era for using this kind of technology, and it's going to be really game changing, right? In terms of graph technology is all about seeing relationships that may not have been as obvious, or proving the relationship that maybe you felt subjectively but not objectively. I think ML is going to illuminate relationships and connections between things that we have not even glimpsed before, right? This is going to be just a huge story.
Absolutely. I think right now in the graph analytics space, we're still at a level where the technical people are sort of required and doing the heavy lifting. There are some really exciting developments, graph neural networks, graph embeddings, and the data scientists, even if they haven't studied them in depth, just when you mention, graph convolutional neural network or graph embedding, that sets things off in their head. And our workbench is designed to use the Python libraries that they're used to leverage this stuff. Again, take away the pain of learning particular graph details. Just call these functions similar to the ones you're used to. But that next level you're hinting at, probably a lot of people have heard about ChatGPT, where we now have technology that my wife is a college professor, and her introductory, her freshman students are often not very good writers. We now have an AI tool that can write so well that it might not get all the facts right, but it certainly sounds like somebody
but
who
it's
thinks
going
they know what they're
to
talking
get all
about.
the facts right. That's turning a dial, getting the facts right. The issue is the way it's right. I read an article on this just a day or two that for the first time a professor suspended, or a college penalized a student for using the chat AI thing to submit some work. I understand there's a tool that will look at something and tell you if Chat
AGP, whatever the heck it is, was used. And we're going to need that stuff. But, so from your wife's point of view, yeah, this is what a menace. Think about it from my company's point of view, right? I probably pay $20,000 to $40,000 a month to contractor writers who write stories based upon press releases, news, topics in DevOps and cloud native and cyber and so forth. What is that going to do to this market? It's still not as good as a real person today, but it's getting better every day.
And the value that the data scientists are seeing from the graph enhanced machine learning is seeing those additional levels of connection is helping them basically make more accurate predictions. It's not so much doing new tasks, but it's doing the tasks that they want to do more accurately or better. How much trust can I put in that prediction more than before, because you're taking more information, a more holistic insight into account.
But so Victor, that's always been the real result, the real, gotcha for automation tools like this. And I think of ML as sort of an automation tool, or AI, whatever you want to call it, as an automation tool like that. Because the first thing we hear is, oh my God, it's going to cost people their jobs. No, I don't think it necessarily, there is some displacement, but I don't think it costs people net number of jobs. I think it allows, in this case, the data scientist to get rid of some of the more mundane sort of connection making and allow them to focus on the ahas that they see as a result of that to make better predictions, more insight, right? Without having the wading through the morass to see those connections that they may or may not ever see because it's just that big a data set.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Data scientists aren't going out of vogue here.
No. Data scientists aren't going anywhere. And I think it just calls for those of us who are not, day-to-day data scientists, but we are consumers of valuable information and making decisions based on that. We need better information to work with. We can always use guidance on decisions, but ultimately, humans have to make the important calls. We just want better, information brought to the table and understand, consequences, et cetera.
Absolutely. Victor, this is one of the longer 15-minute interviews we've done. We've been going a while, but I want to make sure our audience gets it. So this new release of TigerGraph Cloud is out and available now?
It is. You can go to tgcloud.io, or you can go to our main website.
tgcloud.io. Okay.
I actually maybe started our main website, tigergraph.com/cloud.
Great.
tigergraph.com/cloud. And you can check it there. Which release was this again?
This is 3.8.
3.8 is the latest and greatest. All right. Hey, Victor, I want to thank you for coming on here. I know besides 3.8, we spent a lot of time just laying a great foundation. I think our audience, though, will appreciate kind of hearing, from the horse's mouth, no pun intended, from the tiger's mouth this time, what really a graph database is all about and why they're what a fantastic tool they are. So I encourage everyone to go check it out. Thanks for coming on. Come back and visit us. Keep us posted, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
All righty. Dr. Victor Lee from TigerGraph here. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
is Techstrong TV.
Hey, we are back at AWS reInvent 2022 here in Las Vegas at the Techstrong Studios in the Wynn Las Vegas Hotel. They're a really special treat here, and I feel really honored to be being part of this conversation, kind of hosting this with some folks who played key role in the creation and the expansion, growth, and definition of DevOps and the things that we just kind of take for everyday normal today. So I'm joined by John Willis and by Damon Edwards, who you've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And so let's first say a little bit about what you're up to now, and Damon, if you do the same. Then we're going to step back and kind of talk a little bit of the origin story of DevOps.
Yeah. I sort of, I've been working on this sort of, I would call it a pet project for 5 years now. It's something called automated governance. And it turned into originally a paper. And then now it's actually a best-selling book called Investments Unlimited. And I've been trying to figure out how to turn that into a startup. And I'm getting too old to do another startup by myself. And I ran into a company out of Norway that basically had written a product that mirrors the story in the book. It's a investment bank fails an audit, and then they sort of DevSecOps their way to sort of improve audit, internal audit, and IT risk.
The company name is?
It's called Costly. And I just, oh my goodness, like, why do a startup? These people have built, and it's very much like, I was early in at Chef, so it was like, I'm like the 12th person in. I was 9th at Chef. They had a seed of like 2 million. These guys have a seed of 3 million. The founder reminds me of Adam J. Anyway, long story short, I'm going to take one more try at this startup game and the company Costly, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Very cool. Look forward to it. Damon, we know you from Rendeck. And
Yeah. I was one of the co-founders of Rendeck. Before that, we did kind of operational improvement consulting, became DevOps consultants, kind of the origin story that intertwines with John going back to some of the precursors of the DevOps movement, like 2008, some of the early gatherings of people that were, along with Patrick's kind of one of his impetuses, if you ever show up if a dev and an ops person show up at the same conference, one of those people were in the wrong place.
Yeah,
right.
How
crazy is that? Yeah. Right. That was natural back then. So we were sort of part of the earlier precursor movement. Somebody did the first DevOps days in the US and all that kind of stuff. But John and I worked together for years, and we did consulting together. And then Alex Honor and Greg Schuler and I, we founded Rundeck, doing runbook automation, which is really about creating self-service operations, right? How do you let people do what previously you have to escalate to experts to do? Which becomes, it's important enough in traditional operating models, becomes incredibly important in the you build it, you run it sort of cloud native, combined with the intersection of DevOps and SRE organizations. And we built that up pretty quick, and got bought by PagerDuty just about 2 years ago to really fill out the
time flies.
That's time flies. The automation side of things, right? So PagerDuty was great at letting you know there's a problem, but then where do you go and how do you go do something about it, right? So we were bringing in the automation to help that happen. So now I've got a product portfolio strategy role there, looking to expand what PagerDuty does, from the signal detection and the AI ops through to the alerting and the schedules and the automation. But how do you apply that to really all this real-time critical work? It's not just incidents that you got to get people together and get the right context and, get things done. And so as the next generation, PagerDuty product line, I've been working
And then let's not forget that from those conversations we had early on, we created a podcast that is still not dead, called DevOps Cafe.
And on a long hiatus.
So you went on a long hiatus.
We're like Seinfeld.
And I think we were trying to set the record for the slowest podcast to get to 100 episodes. That's the plaque we're going to win.
It's great. I mean, at its peak, we were getting 10,000
episode.
People. Alan like smacks us around for your fearless Techstrong founder, right? Just smacks us around like, you got this thing. Why don't you do more of it? And we're like,
it's not dead.
When we have something to say, we do it.
Then
we try to schedule a third person, and then that's impossible.
And
anyway. Subtitles like "What's the Rush?"
Get
to 100
episodes. Cafe, it's still out there, and there's some incredible material over the years.
Well, let's talk about the origin story. You guys go back together, right? Pre kind of 2010. And you've described to John as you both were kind of searching around for what is this and what's going on, and describe that for us.
There was this sort of kindred soul thing that was emerged. So we ran this thing called Barcamp BSM. It's before anybody really, to his point, like, how could we get dev and ops in the same room, right? That was like, and so we ran this thing in Austin, and and I just sent it out on the sort of interwebs, as you will, and not a lot of people showed up, maybe under 25, 30 people, but I'd never talked to Damon, and they flew in. Like these three guys fly in, him and Alex, his co-founder, fly in, and they're like, "Hey, we're here. Like this, we want to talk about this." And like that just like set us off for like a beautiful friendship, but also like right after get back, we both like had this
Kindred
this
spirits.
idea that like this has got to be he had seen it from like working. I mean, in short, Alex had, I guess, at E-Trade had a dev and ops.
Early the web scale systems management.
And he had built the system and they were trying to sell this incredible product, pre-Rundeck control tier. And I don't know, and then we get on the phone like a lot, and we just like have hour conversations about like why this is. And then one day I was like, dude, we should be recording this. Like, and then we started a podcast, and just, over the years, we've really tried to help shape this. We ran the first DevOps days and LinkedIn in the US, and for the first 3 or 4 years. Anyway, that's my version.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about what it was, everyone was feeling that pressure of, because it's funny, at a certain point, large like the Lisa conference, large system. I think at one point it started, it was like 200 servers was large, right? Yeah. And then it was like 1,000. Some of them were like 2,000. Like, whoa, that's a big infrastructure, right? I mean, it's funny. So back then it was just about how do you just scale things up, right? And then it sort of became this shift where scale was no longer the problem, right? We can, and you help, Luke Knies and infrastructure is, Luke, and then Adam,
Puppet founder.
But yeah, all that really kind of helped with this idea that, in fact, Luke's whole speech for the first, I think, kind of year of his public life was, if you put a CD in a server, you should be fired, right? And everybody would clap. And so that idea was like, so we solved the scale problem. Then people realized, but wait a minute, the scale problem is not really the problem. That's table stakes. It's a throughput problem, right? How do you change this stuff, and how do you get a lot of people to work on it and do it in a high velocity kind of way? And everyone was butting up against that problem. And I think we all thought it was a deployment problem at first too, because deployment was like the flashpoint, right? It's where the rubber met the road. Yeah. And so everybody started to get together to talk about deployment. And that sort of, I think, was some of the subtext of early DevOps, was about deployment.
Well, then culture, right? That like we I always think it was interesting, like years later, I say me, but I think a lot of the other community, we didn't realize we were just mirroring Lean. And there were some influences, Mary Poppendieck's Lean software development, but it wasn't until like there was a point in Army, like where I really dug into Lean. I'm like, really, we've been really just doing basic Lean for software development, for software delivery. So because Mary Poppendieck, my friend Mary, but she is actually a friend, but like she was trying to take it from software development, right? Lean manufacturing, and she wrote her book, Lean Software Development. We were it didn't know it, but we were writing the manifesto for delivery of software, right?
And which then realized it's not a delivery problem.
Yeah.
It's an organizational problem. It's a holistic problem.
Right? Culture. But that's what that's the culture. But that was the point of like, if you really studied Lean, if you went back to Toyota and Toyota Ono, it was all about culture. I mean, the fact that they delivered 2,000 cars, a day, was really because that there was a culture there that enabled that.
Which is how we accidentally came up with the term CAMs.
Yeah.
We're on the podcast. We're like, well, how do you differentiate a DevOps conversation from a non-DevOps conversation, from traditional conversation, right? And we're like, what are the pieces, right? And we just happened to say culture first, right? Because it was like, because like it is a culture thing, right? It's a culture change. So there was automation, then it was metrics, and then the last one was sharing, because it's like this culture of like you're explaining, and we noticed at these early DevOps events, people from like that would be hardcore competitors are like huddling on the side having lunch, talking about these common problems that they're having. And so there's a culture of sharing. And then and so then we kind of backed into the CAMS acronym, and that sort of became like the early DevOps.
Do you remember, like, it was, what happened was we normally have guests on our podcast, but every once in a while we just sort of banter. And we had just, the first DevOps days was in Ghent. I was the only American there. We were, I think we were already doing DevOps Cafe, but if we weren't, we
weren't doing DevOps Cafe. We were doing our conversations. We weren't doing.
Well, we must have been. Well, no, we weren't. That's right. Because I think after that we started doing DevOps Cafe. But I remember coming back and calling Damon like, "Oh my God, I just experienced this insane.
You tried to get me to go. You're like, you got to go, and I'm like, it's a lot of money.
But when we came back, you helped orchestrate running it at LinkedIn.
Yeah, we found LinkedIn. We were doing some work at LinkedIn,
and then we had like 300. So it was like 50
Interesting.
people the first one. Now all of a sudden, like 6 or 7 months later, there's 300 people. And the next week we had a scheduled podcast, and we're like, let's just talk about what happened. And we, in fact, it was like we didn't sit down and say we're going to write the canonical taxonomy. We were just like, what was that?
You're still understanding.
Yeah, and we were literally on the podcast, building the I think it's sort of and we're like, that's an acronym, So I don't know if you remember. That's like it was that podcast where we literally came to the conclusion like there is a loose taxonomy here.
Yeah.
So,
it's interesting. The interesting common thread between the camps and what you're talking about is it's storytelling, right? And it's not just one community of telling the story. It's the different perspective of ops and deployment and dev and architecture, whatever it might be. Now having these conversations where we would have lunch separately.
That's right.
Right. That's the world you were trying to figure out how do we.
Bridge. It was exactly what it was. And I think that's sort of how, and everybody resisted having a firm definition, right? Because it was the agile to Scrum issue.
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with Scrum, but it was like it just became this is agile. So if you read the Agile Manifesto, you think about Scrum, you can squint, you can kind of see the principles in there, but it's not the same thing. So it's like, because you have this hard, people allowed it to become this kind of hard definition. And the idea is we realize that it's a much more, it's like lean, right? You can't, it's a total way of thinking and seeing your business that's sort of anti-functional silos and pro sort of flow of work. And, whether you're working in, what kind of business you're in, what kind of technology stack you're running, it's still the same problem. Now you see people in the, full cloud native way of doing things. It's still the same problem. How do you run a high velocity, high throughput organization that is a full DevOps life cycle?
And it was an accidental. We never set out to, like people say, oh, you're the guys that created CAMs. But it wasn't like after that podcast, we were like, okay, let's go tell everybody, let's write a book. It just emerged that people listened to it. And over the years, you'd hear people more it became a thing as an accident. It's kind of cool.
Should have sold merch.
Hats, we should have got cams.com.
We only do.
Dang.
What's interesting is I remember the methodology wars, right? And when things are written down in a manifesto or a specific, this is what the methodology is, it easily becomes dogma. That's not real DevOps because it doesn't meet.
Well, I think more the idea just we wanted to make it like a flag for a certain type of conversation.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Right? That's kind of what it was. It was like, hey, and sometimes because it started it was like, is it chef? Is it puppet? Like, what is the?
What is it?
Like that was the answer.
Is it
what is the DevOps answer? Was it like this? And it's like, no, it's monitoring. So if you think about these things, and then it expanded to be pipelines, right? And from pipelines, it was sort of feedback loops, and feedback loops is a whole. So if you would have just stuck down to it and said DevOps is is automated deployment, it missed the whole learning it, missed the whole expansion of it. So I think that was the main thing people were trying to avoid by not having a hard definition is it's a label for
limited.
Well, we just want to know we're on the same place having a related conversation, and we'll use the DevOps, the DevOps moniker to know that.
Yeah,
I think that was the intention. Then I think some people looked at it as you're purposely being obtuse or something like that.
But it's funny because I don't know if we want to go here, but all the conversations that are going on about DevOps being dead and all that. But I go back to the original Adam Jacob definition, and he changed his over the years, but the original one still is the one that sticks for me. It's a professional, it's a cultural professional movement. Full stop. It's a collaboration. He didn't say collaboration model, and to the point was. I think you're right. If we were to call it, or some people did just say, "Oh, DevOps is just continuous delivery," then no. And then what about all the sort of the culture and the collaboration and so it needed to. I think one of the things I credit Patrick DeBar. I didn't call him a benevolent dictator is wrong because I think most decisions that were made by the people that drove DevOps was more like what would Patrick think if we did it this way? We didn't call Patrick every time, but I think in the back of your head, it was he was a steward of this thing, and he never I always say the curse of the blessing and the curse of DevOps is the blessing is there was no canonical definition. The curse of DevOps is there was no canonical definition. So
And it's interesting because that if you think about how the DevOps days is like the spiritual home of the DevOps movement, right? And I think it still is, and that it's hysterical to think about it. It doesn't exist. There is no like DevOps Days Inc. It's just loose coupling of people who volunteer. But once they have this sort of philosophy that Patrick kind of laid out, everybody kind of sticks to that. It's self-policing, it's self-organizing. There is no central entity. There's a group of people that have kind of raised their hands and say, hey, I'll take responsibility to help sort of communicate
nobody gets
standards
paid.
and whatever.
No money, it's all volunteer.
It doesn't exist.
And
It's a fascinating study in sort of, kind of cultural
an emergent
movement.
pattern of, of a
that
movement.
people expect there's like, somebody you write a check to, right? It's like, it's just a loose coupling of people who've agreed to, I think, sort of an ethos and a set
there's
of
thousands of them run over the last 10 years. I mean, this is a big, if this could rival like O'Reilly or, with their conferences. And to your point, it doesn't exist. There's no corporation. There's no, it is a phenomenal movement.
You're a old chef compatriot. I had this expression he used to always say all the time, which is there's no limit to what you can do if you don't take credit or compensation. Right. And I feel like that was kind of Patrick. Like, he just wanted to see it work. And he never really tried to get a lot of credit for it. He never
took ownership.
Never tried to get rich off it. And, he's a very successful guy, anyways in life. But I think that just shows you like, that's that spirit in action. And that's why it doesn't die. Like a lot of other things, people in technology always want to move on to a new thing, but it keeps kind of reinvigorating itself. And now you have all these new people that are coming into this DevOps world, and it just keeps perpetuating.
It's what lets it evolve and also reinvent itself, right? And expand to other domains.
And most have no idea who like John or I or who,
a lot of people
or Gildas
you guys are, but
Chris Beidart.
All
these people,
so many people.
Lindsay Holman, all these people that were like early on that helped propel all this.
At the 10-year anniversary, I think I tried to get all those guys because everybody there was Gantt. Lindsay Homewood left and went to Sydney and created it there. Chris Byatt did Europe. Stephen Nelson Smith went back to London. I went back, grabbed Damon and said, we got to do this. And just that 30 to 50 people who were in Ghent, it wasn't just that it was a great thing. The people left there with this, like when I called Damon, like, dude, we have to do this. But that's what Lindsay Homewood did in Australia. That's what Stephen Nelson Smith and a couple other people and Chris Byatt did in Europe. And like, the seeds just,
and then Bridget took over for Patrick wanted to go back to being the startup world. Bridget kind of stepped in and helped be the coordinator of the main
and then she's
core group.
She's handed her off to Matt
Stratton,
Matty.
Well, we could spend a whole bunch more time talking about this. Let's sort of turn the time dial to today. And what's your assessment of DevOps today? Sometimes it's easy to look back and say, God, I don't like what it became, or it's so much bigger than what I thought.
Here's what's funny. I think there's a lot of places where it became a job title and the role, and it sort of became like the new version of a release management kind of thing. But I feel like that's sort of being taken over by the platform engineering moniker, right? So that's the new kind of the new job title, the new, like, if I make that my job, I'm going to get a raise and, get more funding or whatever. So that's taken over that. But I think the word DevOps is sort of falling back into what it originally was meant at, which is a conversational label about how do we build and deliver and maintain, high velocity systems, right? And high quality systems, high velocity change. And so I think it's kind of going back into being sort of like a conversation label versus being I
hope that's right, but I think there's, and I don't want to waste too, because I think there's much more interesting things to talk about than the debate right now. Is it SRE? Is it DevOps? Is it platform engineering? And that's just this like categorization of, I say like the comparing DevOps to is it sort of DevOps or is it platform engineering is like, is it Java or is it Jira? It's just, it's not like they're not the same thing. And I hope you're right that after all this noise calms down, that we go back to the fundamentals of what DevOps are, which really is, all right, I'm going to have to say Deming at least once, but like it goes back to sort of agile. It goes back to lean. Like if you look at DevOps, Agile and Lean had incredible influence on that, whether we knew it or not. And then you go back to Lean, it's Toyota and Toyota Production Systems. You go back to Toyota Production Systems, there's a gentleman, he's not the only one, there were some other influential people, but he goes to Japan after World War II and seeds what became the miracle in Japan, and all of that, just finished a book about the gentleman. Almost all of that is really about the humans. There's little pieces about like the technology part or the analytical statistics, and like that's brilliant stuff. But if you read the complete body of work of Deming and you see what Toyota like turned that into, it was all about understanding. Deming called it theory of psychology. It's understanding the motivation, the intrinsic versus extrinsic, the biases, just completely decoupling the psychology of how humans are different and how they can
And I
work.
think it's interesting. And I see the two areas of this line of thinking is expanding to. One is, as John's talking about, there's the going deeper into sort of why, like how do organizations work, how do people work. So understanding, I guess, organizational psychology and physics and people assembling people to accomplish bigger tasks. There's deeper thinking going on in that area. And then I think the other area is it's going into new realms, right? So it's like, okay, well, we got to pull security into this, right? So the whole DevSecOps movement. There's the whole governance, which is near and dear to John's heart, right? The governance side of things.
Costly.com. No, sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
So I mean, the point is like, I think it's new areas where we need to apply this thinking. And also there's like, if you go to like the DevOps Enterprise Summit conference, there's a lot of like deep thinking by big organizations about why does this stuff work or not work in the first place. So understanding coordination costs and silos and principles of flow and queuing theory and all these kinds of like, why does stuff work this way? So it's going deeper in that. And then I think it's also expanding to new this lens of like Lean, the lens of thinking. The lens of thinking is getting more understood, and it's also being applied to new.
And one other thing, I think we would be remiss to have this whole like historical conversation and not mention how, Damon and I literally ran into Gene Kim, and there was this fusion of what we were trying to do, where Gene was still trying to figure out. He says this publicly. He had written the Phoenix Project, and he was trying to, is this a DevOps book or is not? And me and Damon helped him figure that out. But then he just took, he put the stake in the ground that just exploded the conversation, and more around, he's the guy who bring in Steven Spear and like these unbelievable people, these sort of boundary spanners. So anyway, so it's important. I don't see how we have.
That's part of that deeper thinking.
Yeah.
So Steven Spear, one of the foremost, means at professor at MIT. He's got every
Sloan.
He's got every Fortune 100 CEO on speed dial kind of folks. There was the Deming and not Deming, Decker and Cook and Woods and the folks that were safety sciences,
right?
Aircraft disasters, nuclear power plants, hospital emergency rooms, like real high consequence stuff coming into our domain. Our burnout friend, I'm drawing a blank.
Christina Maslach.
Right? So that's the deeper side, right? Taking, those are people that have been, ensconced for decades in how humans perform, how systems and humans interact with each other, the role of tools, the role of culture, the role of measurement, so taking, that's part of that going deeper side of it, right? And then on the sides, and I think what's kind of interesting is I would put Gene in this camp, or anybody who was early on in this sort of the DevOps movement. I don't feel a lot of loss, or people go, DevOps. Nobody really cares. Like if the name DevOps lives on or not, they're not the people there's other marketing people down the road that care about that. I feel like all the early people that I think helped get it off the ground could care less what it's called. Could care less.
Find me a better name.
To it.
It's not platform engineering, but find me a better name and I'm all in, right? But
just keep going.
But it's got to be a name that sort of represents the thing that, like, that name helped get us off the launch pad, right? So give me a better name that sort of takes it to the next 10 years, next 20 years.
Yeah.
And I don't see that one, but me and him, we don't give a rip. If it's not DevOps anymore, we're not going to be considered.
Lose our identity.
Yeah.
It's funny, the guys like Patrick could carry the absolute least.
Yeah. We at least try to make a living around it, make some money, get a nice boat. But Patrick is like,
Yeah, because again, it's like, improving human performance, company performance, which is really the intersection of human performance and organizational, design and system structures. That's, I think, what gets everybody out of bed in in the morning.
Well,
Right.
definitely. I need to wrap. We need to wrap things
Sure,
up. I'd love to
sure.
have another conversation about this, and kind of looking forward to. It really is a different world. We are in such a different world because of the work and all the people that you mentioned, and I think it's representative of you found a set of things, a set of beliefs that you thought were important, and tried to figure out how do you realize those things, whatever form it is. I don't have to be the
And
namer of it or the
and created again. It wasn't an accident that I ran into him, right? It wasn't an accident that when we figured out Gene. In fact, he invited him to the first speak on a panel and I was on that panel. In fact, I know we're going to wrap up, but like the funny story was, Patrick was the sort of moderator, and he made a joke about me being old or something, and Gene said something, a comment. He doesn't look that old. I get off the panel, and Damon's like, you know who that was on the panel? I'm like, what panel guy number 5, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, that's Gene Kim, the guy who wrote the original IT Ops. Visible Ops. I'm like, holy, oh no.
And then what's his name? John Allspaw actually had a copy.
Yeah, oh, that was so
dog-eared
good.
copy in his pocket. He's
John
like,
asked,
and he holds it up, and then Gene was like, "Dude,
Yeah.
somebody bought my book."
So
You're
John,
the one. No.
So John,
Yeah.
John asked if I'd introduce him to Gene, and John, on his way over to Gene, pulled out a coffee-stained copy of
Didn't know
Visible
he was going
Ops.
to be just carrying around his back.
He'd always kept in his back, and Gene like, oh my God, you have my book, and it's like coffee stained, it's dog-eared. It's like it was a real book for a guy who had ran infrastructure, who basically. All right, one last thing. He's the guy, John Osbaugh, who basically did the canonical presentation that we used, which was the 10 deploys a day at Flickr, which actually just changed everybody's mind about how to do
With
deployment.
him and Paul Hammond, who was his ops counterpart, presented together.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, that was Patrick's idea of like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, like not only are they at the same conference, they're on stage finishing each other's sentences.
Yeah.
Not at
End
all.
up doing something that was like insane, which is, we're deploying to production 10 times a day.
Yeah.
Back then, that was like,
That was
I think
insanity.
he calls it immoral, right? He was
Yeah,
like,
immoral.
it's like,
Yeah.
like people were throwing up in the.
I said that. I was
the
in the back.
because
I'm watching the back of the room. I'm like, I'm using a little license. But
crazy, these
people are
people are-
throwing up. This will destroy my
Cats and
time.
dogs.
Yeah.
Dog does not be happening.
All right, we got to go. Probably.
Okay, all right, gentlemen. Thank
do
you
this all
so much,
day.
David.
All right,
It's
all
a
right. That was
privilege.
great.
It's been a lot of
Thanks,
fun.
Mitch. That's awesome.
And John, with you as well. So we're all going to find a way to continue this conversation. May not be here at
Predict.
AWS, but we'll do this on Predict, right? You guys are going to be on
coming
a
down.
panel?
We're gonna do
Okay, Predict 2023, which is January 12th. We'll be having that conversation. You guys are coming down to Boca. I think we're
gonna be
trying to
good.
work that out.
Yeah, I think it's going to
Do
be great.
that. So thank you so much. I'm sure there's many people. I think if we answered the question, DevOps is not a product, right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
if
yeah.
we did
I
nothing
think we got
else,
that one good. Yeah.
I think
But,
we
but,
nailed
if
that.
you want it to be,
But if you want
I'll sell you one right
Go
now.
ahead,
Yeah.
make it.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, if you want it to be, make it so. All right. We'll see you all in a little bit. Thanks for joining us. More guests coming up. Please come back and be with us.
This is Techstrong TV.
The great pleasure of being joined by Alan Shreve. Is that how you say your last name, Alan? Did I get that right?
That's right, Mitch.
Oh, good. And Alan's with Ngrok. Welcome. Good to be having you on the show today.
Hey there, Mitch. It's great to be here. Really excited to be on the show.
Well, I'm excited. Some great news about your funding announcement. We'll get to that. First, tell folks about yourself and let us know a little bit about Ngrok.
Absolutely. My name's Alan Shreve. I'm the founder of Ngrok. You might know me as Inconceivable on the internet, which is the handle that I go by. Ngrok is API first ingress as a service for developers. So we are solving the problem of application ingress by really taking a different approach. Traditional application networking requires developers to tape together a lot of legacy solutions. Things like their own proxies or VPNs or load balancers that they're taping together and then operating themselves. And Ngrok is building a solution that allows you to essentially like extract all of those pieces into a service layer that we operate on your behalf, so that problem is out of your hair. And then really allows developers to self-service and create that ingress in a programmatic, dynamic way, allowing their applications to really be independent to receive ingress and become ingress independent, decoupled from the environment where the applications run.
Take some of those problems out of the developers' hands, at least, to solve it all for themselves. Well, first, let's cover your funding announcement. You recently announced a Series A. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a tremendously exciting milestone for the company. We raised $50 million in funding from Lightspeed and Co2. We're particularly excited that this is our very first fundraise for the company of any kind. The entire company up until this point has been built in a fully customer-funded way, where we built the business off of delivering real value to real customers. So it's a real inflection and milestone for the business to walk on this new path.
So not a deck presented to the VCs and off you go. You've really got a product and market and some customers to show for it. That's great.
That's right. ngrok has really grown to a tool and piece of infrastructure that developers all around the world trust, and we built that adoption really on the strength of an amazing product. ngrok has a community of 5 million developers, and we're signing up more than 4,000 every day who show up and are really excited to get their hands on the technology, and that's really one of the things that was really, strong for us as we went into to go raise this round was that kind of amazing traction with developers.
A good friend of mine who's one of the best developers I've worked with, he said to me several times, you can tell when a product was built by developers for developers, not just developed like a security company might develop a product. It looks very different than how a developer would develop a product for themselves, right? Does that relate to you? I would imagine. Given the name of your company alone, I think that kind of says it all.
that resonates really strongly. ngrok got started because I am a software developer by trade and still think of myself as one. And one of the problems that I had very early on in my career was getting ingress to my laptop, right? And I needed ingress to build webhook consumers. Basically, receiving those inbound HTTP requests from the outside world is really challenging from a development standpoint. So that was the initial genesis of the product. And once I built that original piece of it, which was an open source project, and then launched the initial service, there was really an outpouring of interest and excitement and support from the community about the solution. It's one of those things that rings true for developers is, when you solve a problem, it often is one that many other developers are running into as well. So that was something that I saw in the very early days. And, the genesis of ngrok was really about hearing and feeling that outpouring of excitement and support. And that was really kind of the initial reason that ngrok became a company and was founded, was really on the strength of that community excitement and feedback to build it into something much bigger than it was.
So I'm curious about the challenge that you and the developers face about kind of setting up this environment for themselves. Is it the kind of time or energy or complexity of doing that, or is it also, I have to go work with the security organization? They aren't quite getting yet what I need and why I need it or how I need it, or is it some of both?
I would say it's some of both. Creating ingress is a really challenging problem, and it's one that's bespoke to environments. The way that I create ingress for my applications, to receive traffic from the outside world, is different based on whether I'm deploying an application into AWS or into a functions as a service platform or into CI containers or just on my laptop or on my Raspberry Pi that I run at home, right? The solution that I need for each of them is very different. And so that's one piece that's really challenging. The other piece that's challenging is that ingress is a problem that requires multiple stakeholders. Infrastructure teams, security teams, and application developer teams all really need to align on the type of ingress that's created and how it's configured. And that kind of friction can slow down the delivery of applications.
especially if someone else is picking a technology or product that kind of suits what they need or what they think the organizations need, but now you have to implement it, right? It wasn't really necessarily built for developers, but I can work with that. And obviously, one way to get people to use things is make it easy for them and make it feel like it's part of their development environment, development cycle, the tools that they use.
That's exactly right. ngrok strives to create tools that are, one, appealing to developers, but are also appealing to those other stakeholders, right? To the infrastructure teams and the security teams, and that we are creating the interfaces that everyone expects and is excited about, and really finds their usefulness in.
Now, who usually administers ngrok once it's set up and developers have built their applications to use it for ingress? Is it still the development teams, more the platform team, security team, or does it just depend on the organization?
You would see a collaboration between those different stakeholders for administration of the account, but you have all the right collaborators there, right? It's going to be the policies that you will create around ingress, might be set up by the security team. The actual configurations for how to create ingress might be set up by an infrastructure team, and the actual usage of the product may be set up by the developer teams. But it really depends on the size of an organization. In smaller organizations, developer organizations or developing teams may set up all of that themselves.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine too, sort of compliance and validation of what's happening and having the data accessible to be able to track that. Are we applying the policies that we said we're going to apply, and are they in effect? And having that automatically tracked for you is going to be a huge plus to developers. Don't have to worry about how do I build this into my logs and how do I then get it out and get it to the people that want it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. ngrok is essentially like tracking those changes for you and recording those events of how your ingress is being updated over time. And then also on the compliance story, right, ngrok has invested in the additional security certifications from a business standpoint to ensure that it's useful for your business. We have SOC 2 compliance and other things that you can find on our trust portal that should make your organization comfortable with using the product.
It's what every developer wants to work on, and they're happy that you do it. They don't want to have to, right?
That's right. ngrok is about, our mission is about empowering developers to build, and the more pieces, right, of that we can, take care of for developers so that they can focus on building is really what gets us excited and really what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Fantastic. We'll talk about, $50 million for your first round. That's, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's a good chunk of change, as they say. What are your plans for the use of those funds? You've already created a product. You're already engaging with customers. And, what do you plan to use that, or already putting the money to good use for?
So we raised this round to really meet the increasing demand for ngrok and our Ingress as a Service platform, with more than 4,000 developers signing up for it every day. That's a tremendous amount of adoption. And really, we raised the funds to really scale the business to meet that demand. Beyond that, we're also investing in additional new products, new feature capabilities on top of the platform. We're listening to what developers want and what they're excited about, and what the other stakeholders need out of a platform like this. And a lot of that investment is going into creating those additional touch points, additional features in the product to deliver that first-class experience to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Well, and developers are about community and knowing that a company knows how to support developers, right? Not just fill out a ticket and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Great. Well, let's. I'd love to talk about then. People that might go to your site to check out the product and check out what they can do with it. What are some of the things that, if I'm a developer, what could I do with a demo account or trial account or something that they could engage with and see how ngrok works and if it works for them?
ngrok has a free tier that developers can sign up for and get started to use for development use cases, as well as like hobbyist kind of use cases of things that you're building at home. ngrok, really, we pride ourselves on getting developers to that initial moment of value incredibly quickly. There is essentially like you download a piece of software and you run a single command on your command line, and you'll be off to the races. Some initial things that you might really get excited about is once ngrok has created ingress to your service, it's really easy with just a few command line switches to then add authentication. You might want to add like Google OAuth authentication in front of your command, or to add observability by sending those traffic logs to another log destination. Or even something like creating initial resiliency primitives by adding like circuit breaking in front of your application with just a switch, or turning on load balancing, where you can essentially like start up new instances of your program and the ngrok ingress agent, and you'll initially begin load balancing without any real like setup or configuration. So that kind of like instant magic moments are really what we strive for, and really reflects our mission to deliver value to developers as quickly as possible, and allow them to get back to building their applications.
Everything's about time to value, right? Make it easy.
That's 100% right.
Exactly. So talk about the kind of API technology that you work with. Does it matter if I'm using REST or GraphQL or ERPC, or other specific technologies, webhooks, whatever it might be, that you're most accustomed to working with?
ngrok supports all types of network traffic. The ones with the most application level primitives that we have at the moment are around all kinds of HTTP traffic. So that may be traffic for APIs, but it may also be traffic for traditional web applications that are browser facing types of apps. That includes webhook consumers as well. But even if you're using other types of you're creating ingress for other types of services like databases or RDP or SSH, other kinds of like network protocols, ngrok has additional capabilities that allow you to create ingress for those types of services as well.
Cool. So anything that's HTTP based or can be done over that kind of a protocol, am I getting that right?
Really, anything that runs on top of TCP is something that ngrok can assist you with. Most of our application level primitives are oriented towards HTTP applications, though.
Okay, good. Are there any particular applications you mentioned, like database and some things like that? Are there any types of applications or environments that you're best suited for, or is it more kind of general purpose, anything that's TCP/IP, and you can begin to work with your technology?
ngrok is an ingress platform, and part of building platforms is making sure that they are general purpose and can be adapted and suited to any application that you're working with. So I'd really say that ngrok is generic in that way, and that you can adapt it to the type of application that you're working with. That being said, I would say that HTTP based applications, APIs and web apps are the ones that you'll find the platform is most suited to at the moment.
And very prolific at that. So very common technology. Great. Well, where do folks go to check things out, give the tires a kick, or take things for a spin?
Absolutely. You can, get started by going to our website, ngrok.com, downloading, a small piece of software and signing up for a free account. Also, whatever, ecosystem or platform you're working in, ngrok typically has really easy commands to install it using package managers like Homebrew or apt or the like.
Yeah, I've visited the site. I haven't tried it product now, but very quickly see right on the front page, this is built for developers. Pretty straightforward. Very cool. Talk a little bit more about the support too, because I know how important that is for developers. What's your approach for that?
Can you clarify that a little bit for me? What are you talking about?
How do you engage with the people that are using your technology Is it primarily, over a community-based tool? Do you do it on the site? Do you use some existing? You don't do it on Reddit, I assume, just to pick an absurd example. But how do you connect with people and support them that are using your technology?
Yeah, if you want to get involved in the community and come chat with us, we have an open and public Slack channel that's on our website. Really easy to just come and join and have access and talk to us and other members of the community who are building solutions on top of ngrok.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, Alan, congratulations again on the funding round and the success that you've had today. We look forward to more great things from ngrok.
Mitch, thanks so much for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure and great sharing ngrok with you and your audience.
You bet. Look forward to having you back.
Looking forward to it.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Amir Khan, is the CEO for Alkira. We're talking about SD-WAN, SASE, and what's going on with remote access in general. Amir, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks for having me.
I think when the pandemic initially hit, we all thought that we'd be on some sort of SD-WAN / SASE setup by now. People would ditch their VPNs, and yet it's been, slow progress. It's not clear to me it's moving any faster than it would of its own normal accord. But what's your sense of where are we in this migration? And maybe the journey is just longer than we all thought.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that happened after pandemic. People started working remotely from homes. So perhaps the branch transformation to SD-WAN slowed down a little bit. But at the same time, the cloud adoption was increasing. So people were trying to put more and more into the cloud without shipping any hardware or any devices which were being delayed because of the manufacturing reasons. So the cloud adoption started taking off. And what we have noticed is that cloud infrastructure, in our case, we build a common network infrastructure across all clouds, and that's taken off quite a bit.
And what is the level of sophistication in networking right now? And I'm asking the question because there are so many people working from home using a VPN to go to the branch office. And then from the branch office, they're shifting traffic back to some data center through some backhaul mechanism for the cloud access. And the latency issues, as you imagine, probably aren't as fun as most users would like. So right. Where are we in this adventure? How complicated is what we're calling cloud networking these days, and what are we doing wrong?
Yeah. So first of all, users want to access where the applications are residing directly as quickly as possible, but the least amount of latency and the highest performance possible. The applications used to reside purely in the data centers, and now, depending upon which customer you talk to, it could be somewhere between 30 to 70% applications sitting in the cloud now. So customers want to hop onto the cloud as quickly as possible. And what we allow them to do is by creating a common infrastructure across all hyperscalers, we allow them to come directly to the cloud as if they would have had access through the data centers into the cloud. So basically, we are shifting all the applications which used to reside, like firewalls, like cloud, IPAM services, into the cloud, so that the customers don't have to go to the data center and basically circle around and go back into the cloud. They can directly go into the cloud in a very secure manner.
And if that's the case, who's making that decision these days? Who seems to be at the forefront of this transition? Because it seems like I need kind of a dedicated networking team, but not every company has those these days. So what does it take to kind of get to this new era of networking, and who leads the charge?
Yeah, so application development teams, the cloud teams in the customer base, they have the requirements. They come up with the requirements, and then they work with the security and networking teams to come up with a solution. Still, primarily for the network piece, network team is responsible, but the collaboration between teams is increasing as the shift takes place to the cloud.
Do you think this new era of cloud native applications, therefore, is going to drive a lot of this transition because they're made up of these microservices that are very latency sensitive?
Oh, well, what we have noticed is that microservices still reside in a single cloud. A majority of our customers are telling us the reason they're adopting multiple clouds is because the users are accessing either applications, different applications like directory services in one cloud and some servers in another cloud, etc. But it's not much of east-west traffic between clouds. So yes, there is increase of the cloud utilization, but we still don't see microservices spread across multiple clouds. Now, within the clouds, it's already optimized for microservices, right? So where you want to have the ability or the flexibility is in the hybrid environments. A majority of the traffic from users, whether they're sitting home or now with more and more people going back to the offices, they can directly access the cloud, and majority of the traffic is north-south. There's very minimal traffic as we talk to the customers, which is going between clouds, whether it's between cloud applications or microservices being spread across the clouds.
Each of the cloud service providers seem to have their own SDN network of some type. Why do I need something that sits above that? Am I trying to centralize the management of networking across multiple clouds despite the lack of integration between the clouds? Is that the idea? Or is there something about the way those networks are constructed that they might lock me into a specific cloud provider?
That's a very interesting question. When we embarked upon this journey in 2018 to build a common cloud network infrastructure, we studied the clouds quite a bit. And what we were noticing is that enterprises were struggling even adopting a single cloud, and the slowest piece was the networking piece. The applications were agile, even the compute storage were quite agile, as long as you were spinning them up in pieces in virtual, private clouds, etc. But when you brought it together with the enterprise environment, networking environment, the segmentation was lacking. The number of routes that you could carry across regions was lacking. End-to-end policy was lacking. End-to-end route control was lacking. There were so many different details. And then on top of that, the cloud network piece was stitched together manually. And one of our customers called it spaghetti mess, because it was all brought up manually by stitching tunnels together between instances. So let's say you wanted to deploy a firewall. You had to figure out how to do that. If you wanted to distribute traffic across firewalls and make it elastic, that was a problem. So what we noticed was that there was no enterprise class, carrier class capability available inside the cloud networks for networking. And their own infrastructure was very highly available. But what enterprises need high availability for networking, you had to do it on your own. You had to deploy nodes in multiple zones. You had to figure it out as a customer yourself. You had to figure out inter-region redundancy, disaster recovery. So the poor customer was left to learn one cloud, and then there were requirements coming in from teams to, adopt another cloud because of optimization of certain applications, etc. Or let's say you merged with a company, as an example, then your team had to learn that cloud. Every cloud is done different. Then another cloud came into the picture. So on an average, there are more than 3 clouds that our customers are using. And that's what we have noticed across the board, especially with large enterprises. And that was becoming a nightmare for customers to handle. And there was a dire need for infrastructure like ours. There were orchestration companies before us who were utilizing the underlying capabilities of the clouds to make it a little bit easier. So think of it as network management capabilities of the past in the networking industry. But that was always lagging behind the cloud providers' capabilities. So what we did was we built our cloud inside the clouds. We utilized the cloud capabilities and we built our infrastructure inside the clouds because we didn't want to have any dependency on Microsoft Azure puts out this feature in networking and AWS puts out this feature in networking. We wanted to provide a networking solution for the enterprise, which was carrier class. And that's what we have built. And once we did that, now we have this common abstracted layer across all clouds, which seamlessly interconnects with the hybrid environments. And then we integrated best of breed applications or services from Palo Alto, Cisco, Checkpoint, Fortinet, whatnot, right? All so that customers could standardize on whatever firewalls they were using. Whatever IPAM services they were using, they could standardize that. I'll give you an example. I was last week at the Open Network User Group. One of our customers, Chart Industries, presented there. And they were struggling with IoT traffic going all the way back to the data centers and tromboning into the cloud, right? And with our capabilities, now you have shifted the mini data centers into regions. And now all those applications can directly access the cloud in a very secure manner. So it's a very comprehensive solution, which allows them to meet their compliance requirements, the day 2 operations, the troubleshooting, which they were not able to do before that. Imagine if you have 10,000 tunnels, interconnecting 1,000, 2,000 VPCs and the hybrid environment and remote users, everybody coming in, it becomes truly a spaghetti mess. And if you do any kind of day 2 operations, and imagine upgrading all that software, right? That becomes a nightmare. So what we have done is taken over that responsibility from the customers and providing a SaaS type solution for networking for the first time in the history of computer networking, so that the customer doesn't have to worry about any of that. I hope I made myself clear. I'm very passionate about this stuff. It's really exciting.
No, I get you. Do you think at some point we'll be moving more to this hybrid cloud computing environment that people envisioned, or will everything kind of still sit in this one, classic workloads will run in one cloud, but not in the other, and these things will remain somewhat semi-isolated?
Well, hybrid is the thing. I think it'll be a long time before applications move 100% into the cloud. Especially for large enterprises. Now, there are companies like ours which are born in the cloud. We, have our own physical plumbing done inside the branches and stuff like that. But beyond that, everything resides in the cloud. We don't have data centers as startups, right? But those are new age companies which are coming up. Majority of the companies that have existed in the past for a long time, they have to redo the applications in many ways to, transform them into the cloud. So they're doing a lot more now. We are starting to see banks and, hospitals and all these guys coming in now saying that we are starting to move more and more applications into the cloud, but it takes time. So for the foreseeable future, what I think is going to happen is that we will see hybrid environments for a long, long time. And that's why we have integrated our solution with the on-premise, capabilities that Cisco's and Junipers and Aristas of the world offer. And then on the other side, we connect into the cloud and we become that glue to allow these multiple environments to exist together, right? And then as far as multiple clouds are concerned, that is happening today. And as I alluded to it earlier, customers are accessing either because of redundancy or mergers or acquisitions, or certain applications running better and cheaper into a particular cloud. But that whole thing needs to come together as a network segment for the users to consume them in a proper manner from the hybrid environments, right? And that's what we are noticing across the board.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned developers and development teams driving this transition. And of course, DevOps is heavily used by those folks. Do you think network operations is going to become an extension of DevOps as we go along here? And are these things going to become more programmable and this is how I'm going to approach that? Or will it be still a graphical tool with a dedicated network administrator or some combination of all of those things? What's your crystal ball telling you?
DevOps is a way of doing things. I mean, there are tools available to do many, many different things, right? And networking happens to be one of those things. And the way we look at it is that there will be more automation, more APIs available, more capabilities like Terraform available, which we provide. We are a Terraform provider for our solution. And the networking teams can program that. Now, what happens is that you still need deep knowledge of networking to be able to control the network piece, right? So yes, the tools are coming together, but the teams have to learn individually all these capabilities so that they can create that DevOps type environment.
How automated can all of this get in the future? We hear everything about machine learning algorithms, AI, all kinds of magical things are coming down the pike. How smart can smart get when it comes to managing networking?
So that's always an interesting question because, in networking, as we started deploying these large networks, even in the early 90s, right, we used to deploy networks with maybe 50,000 nodes in many cases because there used to be many more branches at that time, by the way, right? And it was lower speeds and feeds, but the scale of the environment was very, very large. And the way we created hierarchy and for being able to control that environment, because network is a very mission critical environment, right? So you have to have certain level of predictability when you're troubleshooting if something goes wrong. So now you can bring in all kinds of new AI-based tools and machine learning in certain aspects of those solutions to probably isolate the problems. But when you're taking actions, people still like to control them and have an understanding of what impact will it have on the overall environment. So as far as AI is concerned, we are not there yet. But I think people are starting to experiment with the AI type constructs to see how we can intelligently start to understand things better and then probably propose something to the network administrators because it's a very complicated environment. Mind you, if a large bank or some of these financial institutes, if they have a network go down, now you're losing hundreds of millions of dollars an hour, right, in transactions. And that is not a very good thing. So certain level of predictability and understanding of how things will progress, right? If we fix one thing, how is it going to affect the rest of the environment? That's where this is an inherently distributed environment. It's a very complicated environment. Since recently we have started to understand the distributed computing well enough, networking from the beginning has been loosely coupled distributed environment. And that's why it was so difficult, right? And on top of that, it is mission critical because all your applications run on the network. If network is down, everything is down. So that's why we are very, very careful. Yes, we are starting to use some of the machine learning AI capabilities, but very carefully.
Mm-hmm. It has often struck me that networking is incredibly complex, and the more platforms you add, the more complex it gets. And yet we don't hear about, there are outages and there are downtimes, but it's not what I would say catastrophic. So networks are surprisingly resilient. So why is that? Or is this like a problem that's going to explode, or are we getting better at the resiliency side of this equation? But we still have issues.
Yeah. So we have learned over many, many years how to make redundancy, high availability, how to build it into the networking environments as we deploy them, right? And that was a fairly manual process. We had to go through literally design every aspect of it in a very manual fashion. I want to deploy this many routers in the background. This is the type of mesh or partial mesh I need to create. This is how things need to be designed from the routing protocol perspective to create a level of hierarchy, and what if my MPLS environment goes down, do I have a backup through internet or some other mechanisms like lease lines, right? So we built that high availability into the networking environments, and that's why people did not hear that much about it. But every once in a while, you do hear about it when networks are down. It turns into that application was down. And sometimes in the background, it was the network which was down. But over time, and that's what we are trying to automate now. So every customer does not have to build redundancy to their own levels. We need to have solutions which are fully automated, right? And which have that level of intelligence built in so that the network doesn't go down. Is it multi-AZ? Is it multi-region? Is it across providers, right? If my backbone on one provider is down, which likelihood is very low, but there are some customers who cannot tolerate more than 2 minutes, right, in a year of downtime. I mean, 5 nines is, I think, around 17 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, right? But there are certain environments which cannot even tolerate that. So you have to build it into the design of whatever your solution offers to the customer. And that's why it's so mission critical. What we build, I mean, its adoption cycle is a little long, but once customers adopt it, there's no way they're going out of that environment because, it's very difficult to move into an environment. If you think about Cisco, why has Cisco been in the computer networking environments for the last 30 years, and why are people not able to get it out? Because there's so many tools and so many surrounding things built around that to support that infrastructure. People will have to redo that if they adopt a new solution. The reason companies like ours come into the picture, startups, is because we are solving a newer problems for the customers. There was nothing that existed from the previous providers in the cloud networking environment within the cloud. And AWS and Azure and all these guys, they've done a tremendous job as far as compute resources or storage or applications or other things are concerned. But networking was not necessarily their expertise to that extent. And that's where the expertise that we've had over the last 30, 35 years, marrying that with the cloud computing environment and understanding of that. There are very few people, mind you, who have transitioned from networking into the cloud, right? Majority of our friends are retired now, So we continue to work on that. And for that, you need the knowledge of both environments to be able to offer a enterprise class, fully available solution to the customers.
All right. Well, it's a brand new age of networking. It's just a question of how long it's going to take us all to get there. Hey, Amir, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure talking to you. And please reach out anytime if you would like to discuss anything further.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Roland Grouse, who is head of product for Agoric, and we're going to be talking about blockchain, but not just the platforms and the theory that goes with it, but also how to build the applications and maybe what the implications are for DevOps teams. Hey, Roland, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me on.
We hear a lot about blockchain and people are building all kinds of interesting applications, and it's only a matter of time before those applications get added to DevOps workflows and become part of the larger Scrum, as they say. And the question that I would put to you is, so what are those applications going to be built in? What tools are people going to use? And what do the platforms look like? Because, it's not rocket science at the end of the day. It sounds like magic, but hey, it's a platform. You got to build applications for it, much like any other, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think that as the industry has evolved, the tooling around how to actually build and deploy contracts has evolved with it. And, a lot of that started with Ethereum. I think as you think about what it means to build and simulate contracts before they go live to production, blockchain has a bunch of additional challenges that may be a little bit unusual to developers coming from other places. So, you have to simulate a chain running. At times you may need to simulate other chains or bridges or external economic activity that affects the things that you are deploying. And so that does bring a bunch of challenges. And I think the industry is still sort of catching up with some of the tooling around that. That said, from the Agoric standpoint, we are focused on JavaScript developers, and that means that at least from, as you're coding, you're able to build in your normal tools, VS Code with all of the functions that you typically use, and autocomplete on your functions and things like that, which I think ends up being a huge force multiplier for developers early on.
How much do I need to know about the underlying platform versus just JavaScript itself, and how much can you abstract away the complexity of that platform so the developer just writes their code like any other app?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in Agoric, we do a good job of abstracting away the platform. So what you have to learn to build an Agoric is the specific frameworks that we put out there. So we call that Zoe, our smart contract framework, and our electronic rights transfer protocol. And once you understand how to work with those frameworks, then you mostly are abstracted away from anything around consensus or things like that. And so, the way it typically works is, this industry is moving so quickly. When you're building stuff that's on the bleeding edge around new functions that are coming out at the blockchain level, you may need to be aware of those. But for smart contract use cases, which covers probably 95% of what people want to build, you really can ignore anything that's going on in consensus. So happy to dive in a little more deeply or contrast that with Ethereum. But I think from our side, that's been really important for us because, as you've seen, it becomes very difficult to build in blockchain, even for seasoned developers, because they need to be aware of so many different parts of the stack in other systems.
Are there things that developers need to know about building a smart contract in particular using JavaScript that's slightly different? I mean, what makes a smart contract smart?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think, and maybe this isn't specific to JavaScript, but more about how our system is architected and the way we think that smart contracting is moving. In our system, things are asynchronous. And so when developers who are accustomed to an Ethereum or similar kind of environment think about how their transactions would get executed, everything sort of happens in sequence, but the whole world stops for a given user's transaction. And so that allows you to think about things a certain way. When you come over to our system, you do need to be aware that there's sort of promises we're resolving and things like that, that it changes your mindset about potentially how your system works. So it's sort of a broad answer, but I think that's one difference coming into our system. I think the other piece for us is, we use an object capability model, which ends up being a major difference and sort of mindset shift versus an accounts kind of model that you would see in other systems. We do that intentionally to make sure that as people build, they can reason more carefully about the security properties of their system. And so a whole lot that we could go into there, but that ends up being a mindset shift that you would need to have coming into Agoric.
We hear a lot, of course, about Web3 as the great new buzzword of the moment. But my question to you is, are we really just talking about a centralized approach versus a decentralized approach? And eventually we're just going to consider this as an extension of the IT fabric, or is Web3 something that is fundamentally so different that we need a buzzword for it?
That's a good question. I sort of lean towards your former description, where it really is a continuum. And I think there's a lot of people in the space who are decentralization maximalists, and to me, that's just not a useful position to take at all. Like depending on the use case, certain things should be centralized or decentralized. You may choose to trust a third party versus not. And so the way we like to think about it is it should be seamless to move between the same kinds of environments that people are used to working in Web 2 to a more Web 3 kind of architecture without really having to think that hard about it. The analogy that some of our founders tend to use is, you link out from a corporate controlled kind of internet to the broader internet without thinking about it at all, right? You don't think about, I'm in this system that's sort of enclosed only to my corporation versus I'm going to the broader internet. You just kind of like go between things depending on what you need to do. And that's likely how this evolves too. I do think that in Web3, it's the part that ends up being very different is you actually do need to think about the characteristics of what's backing what you're doing, or the trust assumptions that you're making. And arguably, you should be doing that more in Web 2 also, right? People use Facebook without thinking about the trust assumptions they're making there. But here it becomes much more visceral. And so that will be, that is something that is a little bit different. But again, it really is just a continuum.
Today, a lot of folks rely on DevOps platforms of a variety of kinds to build both monolithic and microservices-based applications. Will that also be the same model they use for building out Web3 apps, or is there going to be a different motion, or how do these things all come together?
Yeah, I think it's early enough that it's not totally clear how it will fully come together. But there will certainly be large, and I would say it's an opportunity if you're somebody that's very DevOps minded to help improve where the space is at. There will be a large number of different ways to sort of simulate, like create a workflow for managing, running smart contracts, for deploying to production. There's all sorts of stuff around governance that needs to get built. I think frankly, we're still very early in all of that, and I don't have a great view on how it's going to evolve or emerge. And I would definitely encourage you that if this is something that you are talented in, there is a great opportunity in this space.
Are there different use cases for different types of blockchain platforms? So will I ultimately need to master multiple blockchain platforms, or is there going to be one blockchain platform to kind of rule them all in all use cases? And, it's going to be kind of this single standard.
Yeah, I think certainly not the latter. There will be multiple chains, and there will be multiple frameworks. And I think the question for me is, do we sort of land on 3 or 4, or do we land on 50? And I think, I'm not sure exactly where it will evolve. Agoric lives in the Cosmos sub-niche of the ecosystem. And the way Cosmos is architected is we sort of share a consensus layer, but then the execution environment above that can change depending on what you need to do. And the whole idea is that you end up with a large number of chains that operate independently, but can speak the same language when they sort of transfer assets or other things between them. That aligns with my own vision of how this evolves, with the rest of Agoric's vision. Certainly people in the industry may disagree about that. But it does mean that blockchains can get tailored to specific use cases, which I think is sort of the first part of your question. Like, are there reasons to have different ones? There certainly are. If you look at Solana, which is outside of Cosmos, their whole idea is let's have the chain process as many transactions as possible. And that starts to open up use cases that are just impossible in Ethereum. You can have order books that run on chain and actually feel like, a real centralized service would feel. That sort of thing obviously is differentiated. And I think we're starting to get to a point, with Cosmos, with app chains launching around specific use cases and the communication between them, where hopefully from a developer standpoint, you end up only needing to use a few frameworks, even though there are hundreds or thousands of actual blockchains.
What do you think are going to be some of the killer applications for blockchains that people should be thinking about or taking advantage of, or already impacting us in ways we don't see or appreciate?
Yeah, really what a blockchain does, though I tend to look at applications where trust assumptions are important. And I think that money was the first clear application there, where you can have Bitcoin that exists outside of a nation state guaranteeing it, or a bank guaranteeing it, or something along those lines. And that's clearly something where you sort of pull a trusted third party out of a system and have it still operate correctly. And that has sort of expanded to broader finance, where you can have a lending platform where the code executes the rules around borrowing and lending, and you don't need an intermediary there. And so I would continue to look to those kinds of use cases. And I tend to think of governance as being an important thing as well, where you can have code execute the outcome of a vote without needing to sort of trust anything else outside of the technical apparatus that conducts the voting. And that sort of thing ends up having a whole lot of applications. So, if you're trying to build agreement amongst a bunch of different parties that don't necessarily trust each other or want any particular one of them to lead, blockchain starts to be the right answer. And so I think that's where we'll see it evolve. And then beyond that, really just enforcing scarcity in digital worlds, right? So, we saw that with NFTs in sort of largely trivial examples over the last couple of years, but I think that the momentum there is real. So enforcing property rights online, that sort of thing becomes, a blockchain native thing very quickly.
What do you wish customers knew early on versus learning the hard way when they get started? And, what's kind of your best advice to folks to get prepared for doing this stuff without necessarily, having to pay as high an idiot tax as they might otherwise pay?
Yeah, so I would say that tax in blockchain and smart contract development is really around security. It is, if you're looking at Ethereum or similar places to build, it is really hard. This has been proven out. It is really, really hard to build smart contracts that end up being robust over the span of time because they're open to the environment. They're under attack at all times. This week, on Monday, we had a hack of the Nomad Bridge, which was holding something like $200 million worth of assets. And it was on the Ethereum side, and this vulnerability was sort of repeatable. People figured out that it was repeatable. We had, I think, several thousand people go in and exploit this thing, right? So you have these programs that are holding money that are exposed to the outside world. And the Nomad Bridge, the team there is extremely solid. We know the engineers, like this is not a novice group of developers. It is hard. And so look for, a lot of what Agoric has done and the hard work that we've done is around trying to build our framework such that you can't make certain kinds of errors anymore. And I need to look deeper into the Nomad Bridge hack. I'm not saying we would have necessarily avoided that specific kind of error, but there are a lot of those, reentrancy bugs, things like that, which are very easy to make in existing blockchain infrastructure, which don't exist in Agoric. And again, to use a founder analogy, we tend to view it as sort of similar to the introduction of memory safe languages, where there were just suddenly a certain kind of class of errors you just couldn't make as a developer anymore. And that's what we're really looking to enable, is making it easy for someone that isn't a security expert to build a secure smart contract.
All right. Hey, Roland, thanks for sharing your insights on what's going to be a whole brave new world of opportunity for building applications and extending DevOps workflows, I'm sure. We wish you best of luck and talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Michael.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here live. Well, we're not live. You're live. I'm live, but you're not.
I'm live.
And he's live, but you're not. We are here at AWS reInvent at our studio at the Wynn, and continuing our coverage. I want to introduce you to Guillermo Rauch.
Correct.
Vercel.
Yes.
Not Vercel. But it doesn't make a difference as long as you type it right on the URL. So let's get that right out of the way, Guillermo. What's the URL?
vercel.com.
Excellent. All right. Well, Guillermo, let's talk a little bit about your background.
Yep.
Tell them Tell us.
So I got my start in front-end engineering. So when I was learning to program, I had every available option, as people do these days. And what really stood out to me was the usage of JavaScript inside the web browser really stood out as a unique opportunity because it was the only programming language that could run as close as possible to the visitor, and then you could create really amazing experiences that run in the browser. So front-end engineering kind of got my start as a career. And then many, many years later, I found this opportunity to create a platform that is custom tailored to front-end engineers that want to create really fast experiences on the web.
Excellent. And look, you know what? It amazes me. I've been in tech a long time, right? We used to hire UI, UX designers for that front end of our apps. This is before we even had web-based apps. I'm old. And it was back then that I realized how important front end is. I mean, you can have great stuff on, they're both important. I'm not saying one's necessarily more than the other, but it makes all the difference in the world. And I think once, then web apps became primary and then, apps on phones and stuff. But again and again, it's that, it's the front end that does it, so I can understand.
Yeah, and we're here at AWS conference, right? And Amazon was famous for saying, every 100 milliseconds that we become slower on Amazon.com, we lose 1% in sales.
Yep.
And the more recent metrics that have come out are even more dramatic. So the Deloitte study said for 100 milliseconds of improvement that you get to your mobile web experience, you get an 8% improvement in conversion. That's really dramatic, 100 milliseconds.
So I'm going to, backing that up, we use a lot of analytics packages on our sites. We run DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Cloud Container Journal. And we measure time to load versus fall off.
Totally.
Because it's hard to getting people to read anyway today. They don't read a lot. And
the attention span is really short. It's like TikTok size.
Well, that's why we do video. This they watch.
Totally.
They don't read the transcript. Anyway, so let's talk about Vercel.
Yeah. So we were invited to participate at the keynote for serverless with Holly at AWS, the VP of serverless. And it was an honor for us because what we really pioneered is this idea of there's a framework, Next.js, that we created that builds on top of React. But when you use that framework, by default, you adopt a serverless architecture. So front-end developers have been creating all these serverless and edge apps on Vercel for the past couple years. And now it's obvious that serverless is the default way that AWS and obviously us recommend to build new applications. And I think serverless coming to the front end has created not just a better experience for operations, but it has all these benefits around improving user experience, improving conversion, improving your business. So we're really excited about bringing this duality to market. Better developer experience, but also just a better performing business.
Absolutely. Well, and they're so intrinsically linked. I had a little time.
For sure.
I hear you. So I got a question. Just I don't know if anyone else here is interested. How did you get picked for the serverless piece of this?
Yeah, so we're a really, really, really large AWS Lambda user. So one of the things we do is that we take your front-end code that use frameworks like Next.js, React, Svelte, etc. And then when you push your code through Git, we create serverless resources out of that. So imagine that you define a server rendering page to say, like, this is the homepage of DevOps.com. We notice that it's a dynamic page. So under the hood, we create an AWS Lambda to power that dynamic workload. A lot of customers come to us because they have very sophisticated dynamic front ends. And so we matched this ideal serverless compute primitive that scales extremely well with this great front-end developer experience. And as a result, we've done 100 million deployments of applications in the last 2 years alone.
Good
so
for you
it's
guys.
a really
That's
awesome
great.
flywheel of it's very easy to iterate on these front-end apps, and the serverless operational model is something that companies have come to love.
I love it. That's fantastic. I know we're at AWS, but I got to ask you, do you go on Google and Azure as well?
So the way to think about us is that we're a hybrid cloud. So we abstract out a lot of these primitives. We choose the best ones available for the customer. Clearly for this dynamic front-end rendering workload, AWS Lambda was quite optimal. But nowadays, there's also this new edge compute primitives. One that we've brought to market that is really exciting is called edge middleware.
Really?
So the way that it works is that it allows you to push the routing logic and policy enforcement over a request lifecycle as close as possible to the visitor. And the cold boot characteristics of this compute primitive is amazingly good. We're talking about like 5 millisecond boot up times.
Wow.
So we're now also coming to the new generation of exposing other serverless primitives. We're partnering with companies like Cloudflare to give customers a lot of choice when it comes down to like, what is the right compute mechanism for each part of my application?
Absolutely. You know, we use Cloudflare ourselves, and I've seen them coming down the pike with these types of
it's
offerings.
really impressive technology.
It is. It is. It's funny. Cloudflare is almost like a fourth cloud, but they're not.
Correct.
But they're very different.
Yes.
Than AWS.
And I think also different genesis, more on the security side, and perhaps this is
that's
why
we use them.
for this like routing component, it's been such a good fit, because we need to do this really fast decision making. So to give you a product example, we have customers that have storefronts on our platform, and especially in Europe, sometimes they serve dozens of different countries and currencies on the same domain name. So they need to apply this really quick routing compute logic to say like, oh, this storefront gets rendered in this language and it has this products available. And again, 100 millisecond rule, like we need to do this really fast and as close as possible to the visitor. So Next.js gives the front-end developer this really easy to write middleware. When they deploy it over Vercel, it becomes this global edge middleware. So think of it as like mapping simple UI primitives to global compute resources, and it's a lot of good automation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, look, one of the big themes here at the show this year is sort of, I don't want to say next generation cloud, but cloud matured, right?
Yes.
And I think you just hit on one of the big things is, look, distribution and distributed computing was part of cloud from day one, obviously.
Correct.
But now we're moving to things like edge.
Correct.
And the edge doesn't exist in its own, universe. On either does cloud. This next gen, cloud evolved has to incorporate.
Yes. Everyone needs it, so that's the first principle, right? And the other thing is that we are seeing a little bit of an inversion of the default. So the first thing that you do when you come to AWS is they make you choose a region, right? You go to the top right selector, you bring down like USC's 1, USC's 2, like all these things. But companies are very global. They're global first. So we're pushing for this new kind of cloud programming model.
That should be immaterial, right?
Correct.
Use what's best for me on a given.
Well, it's still giving you the flexibility to enforce, okay, like this.
There are compliance issues.
Correct. And like, again, going back to like the routing problem, you want to say like this storefront needs to go to this underlying resource whose data lives in Frankfurt. And we don't want to get in trouble with those policymakers.
Let me ask you, I know we have a hard stop in a couple minutes. I want to get as much information to our team as possible, or not to the audience. What's the on-ramp to use Vercel? Like, how do they engage?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the first things that happens is teams are starting to embrace composable architectures. What does that mean? They used to have a monolithic build that had everything in it, back-end, front-end, middleware, everything in one thing. And now they're saying, well, I have to break this down. So during the serverless presentation, Lego talked about breaking their backend down into all these Lambda functions as their backend. And Vercel comes in the context of that transformation where you can say, the front end will live on Vercel. I'm going to use a modern framework for performance like Next.js, and that framework can consume data from all these data services. And what data service you choose doesn't matter to us. You could bring data from Dynamo. You could bring data from a headless CMS, from an e-commerce platform, REST, GraphQL. So we're very flexible. And I would argue that we provide the most clear benefits because, again, to your point, it doesn't matter if my backend uses database A, B, or C, but it does matter if my front end is fast. So you can start with even one page at a time. A lot of our e-commerce customers just try us out by routing one page on Vercel, and the rest goes back to perhaps the old monolith.
Yep.
And what they see is a very clear uptick in performance, conversion, user experience, even customer feedback. So you can start trying the Next.js plus Vercel stack or other frameworks, even on just one page.
Excellent. And again, it's VER
Correct.
You know what we forgot to tell people, Guillermo? What's your position at Vercel?
Oh, I'm the CEO and co-founder.
I knew, but I wanted them to know. Hey, man, I want to thank you. Congratulations. You
Thank
guys
you.
seem like you're doing a really, really great job. Congrats on being, chosen for the serverless presentation from AWS.
An exciting time.
Good for you. Check them out at Vercel.com. We're here at AWS reInvent. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back with another guest in a moment.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, everyone. We're back here for our coverage of AWS reInvent 2023. Trying something a little different this time. We took a private conference suite over at the Wynn, which is next door to the Palazzo and Venetian, where the show floor is. And we're doing really casual conversations here over coffee. I want to introduce you to Christine. It's Christina Puccio.
Christine Puccio.
Christine Puccio. Christine, well, you know what? First of all, welcome, Christine. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you.
How are you?
You know what? It's good. The day's flying by. We're loving hanging out in the suite here. Much better than being on the floor with all the noise and everything else.
Yes.
We're going to talk JFrog. We're going to talk cloud. Christine, I should mention, is with JFrog. We'll get into that. But let's hear a little bit about your story. About you've. You're not as old as me, so don't worry.
I'm just going to use 20 plus. Yeah, we'll keep it at that.
That's a cool way of doing it. But you have a great technology background.
Yeah. I stumbled into technology. I was a financial analyst for Lockheed Martin and made my way to AT&T and was in the internet explosion and then found my way at Sun Microsystems for 10 years. Amazing ride with Sun. And then as folks were migrating over from Solaris to Linux, I migrated over to Red Hat, and where I spent 9 years of my time there at Red Hat all in the partner organizations. So I've seen a lot of models, seen them grow and disappear, and it's a really fun ride with partnerships. And now I'm here.
Yeah, now channels and partnership are such a ingrained piece of the technology puzzle, right? Or of the technology world. And we're out here at reInvent. There's 55,000 people, they said this year, which is cool. It's good to see in-person events coming back strong. When I think about it, though, the genesis of AWS reInvent, it kind of started with the AWS marketplace, right? This is a conference built on the channel, AWS's channel, marketplace partners, end users of cloud. But I think that's what makes this event what it is. It is that it's the channel. It's a huge channel ecosystem play.
AWS has really invested heavily in partnerships in general and the programs that they bring to the partnerships.
Yes.
So marketplace being like the extreme, and then also with APN with the whole co-sell. Now they're marrying those two together, which is really nice to see. But I remember Marketplace like back in 2015, and at the time Red Hat had a first party offer, so we kind of like put that Marketplace to the side, and then I got to fiddle with it when I was at my time at Nginx and F5. But it's great.
Wait a second, you didn't even mention that you with Nginx and F5 as well.
I did.
You've been around here now. Okay.
I made my way back to networking, and then now I'm here with DevOps. So yeah, it's when I was at F5 really is when I started diving deeply into the relationship with AWS and what we were doing with Marketplace. And I can tell you just even from 2 years ago, it is not the same experience at all. And it's a constant evolution of services that us partners can take advantage of to really deliver value back to customers, really.
I'll tell you the truth. We even see it here at Techstrong. We work with AWS. And what we work with AWS is primarily with their partners, right?
Oh, wow.
So it's AWS and a partner, and we do multiple type of events and stuff. And what's amazing is this was all through COVID. It continued to evolve and develop, and they just kept at it, and I think this is why we see what we're seeing here this year.
That was it. And so I actually told this story when I first got to JFrog, and showed the growth and spurt of what digital transformation did during the pandemic. So it was like pandemic hit. Then you had, everybody scrambling to transform digitally because consumers were forced to a marketplace or wherever to buy. And then all of those companies flocked over to cloud. And then what happened was they wanted to buy software. So, vendors were looking at how do we make this easy to procure? And then that spurred a bunch of, evolution around the procurement process. And so now here we are in an economy downturn. So we're contracting back.
But serious, yes, we are to a certain extent in some sectors, but you've been around. These are the normal cycles of business, and I've been through more than several of them, and you know what? They come up, they go down. Things were getting a little out of balance, in terms of some of the valuations and stuff. And it's funny. I speak Shlomi Benkayem, the CEO of JFrog's a friend of mine, and we had this conversation. Not even at Yalla DevOps in July. Before then, he said, Alan, because at the time, JFrog's, I don't want to get into a whole stock discussion, but JFrog's stock was not maybe performing as well as some other, high flyer tech companies. And he said, it's like they don't reward me for running a fundamentally sound business because they're all top line focused.
So I have seen that turn of events happen, several blips through my career. And I can tell you, the reason I came to JFrog really was for two solid reasons. It was because they were in the infancy stage of growing their partnerships. Not that they hadn't, but they were looking at monetizing. And being at Red Hat, I got to see that at the ground zero level. And so it was such a wonderful opportunity to come in and help them build that. And the other one was security. Coming from Nginx and F5, I knew it. And I knew that the security was not at the WAF level, right? It has to be ingrained into the developer lifecycle, and developers are having to be more conscious about their decisions. And with the acquisition of Vdoo, I'm like, wow, this is perfect. This is just perfect.
I mean, look, truth be told, that's how I got into DevOps. I started DevOps.com. My background's security for 20, 25 years. And I thought that this whole DevOps, which has given rise to digital transformation, really was a chance for us to get it right, or at least to get another bite at the apple. Because the way we used to do security, it just wasn't working.
Now it's like the place to
be. You know what? For the first time after 25 years of trying to convince people how important security is, all of a sudden it's job one, right? Everybody's, including developers.
And it's number one on there was a PwC study. It comes out every February, and it's like number one.
It really is.
And, I think that, the three areas for JFrog, and you did talk to Shlomi, and, is really the DevOps portion of our business, and then security, and then the developer taking that and thinking 2 years out to the edge. And all of that is technology, but all of that has to be consumed quickly. And so I always say I have the unsexy part of the job, and that's just like making it, deliverable fast.
Right.
And so procurement has become one of the areas that we're innovating, even internally at JFrog, but you see it with marketplaces.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, we're in the hype portion of that curve.
But even marketplaces, which, yes, they've evolved, but the concept behind them has been around a bit. DevOps has taken its turn at improving these things, because what we've learned is, look, what worked for digital transformation 2 years ago is history. What worked even a year ago is stale. What worked 6 months ago was before the economic downturn. I need what works now.
Right.
And so if you're going to be successful with channel, with partners, with marketplaces, you need that kind of DevOps shot in the arm of, fail fast if you have to, but iterate, 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 feedback loop, iterate, reiterate. And I think we're seeing that in real time. You're seeing it real time on the floor there.
Oh my gosh, and it's interesting because if you look at how companies are looking at their posture today with all the vendors that they have. So let's keep going with the digital transformation. Well, what happened? Well, customers were buying SaaS solutions. So what did that do to the procurement person? It made it a nightmare because now you have like 100 different vendors who have SaaS solutions. You know, a large company I think now has around 400. So then there's like this whole tail, long tail of vendors. So now what do you do as a company? You're going to focus on your 20% who are your strategics, and
That
then
you think are.
that you think are, right? And then you're going to but you have this long tail. What's interesting about DevOps is that we are seeing our customers look at standardization across the pipeline. So what happens is those organizations who want to fly under the cover of the procurement, you know, because they don't want to go through the lengthy process. So you're seeing that undercover spending, and it's happening in different pockets of organizations. And so now companies are going, well, wait a minute, who else is using this? And they're trying to consolidate.
Well, it started with the whole shadow IT thing.
Yeah.
Right? People just whipping out credit cards and buying
Right.
stuff not on the sly, but without going through the whole process. Then shadow IT grew into bigger buckets of shadows, if you will. And you had, look, we're a little nothing company, and I just went through a process here where I had our team start adding up. What do we really spend a year on all these SaaS? You know, the marketing team has some SaaS tools they use, the engineering team does, the sales team does, we all, you know,
Guilty.
and, you know, sooner or later it adds up to real money, right?
It does.
It does. Believe me, it does. And, you know, so what can we do to consolidate and really get a handle on that? Because, you know, I tried to do exactly what you said. Okay, let's concentrate on what the big numbers are. Like, which ones are really costing us and are really important. For instance, we use HubSpot.
Yeah.
And we use Cloudflare, right? And those are important. They're decent. You know, it costs us a penny or two. But it wasn't just them. It is that long tail that does add up.
It is.
Because there's a ton of them out there. I've always felt in the DevOps world, so to me, it was just a matter of time until security, you know, merged into DevOps, DevSecOps, whatever you want to call it. And I've been preaching that for a long time. But I always felt that the DevOps world needed that consolidation for what, you know, I call end-to-end DevOps providers.
Right.
And there's only a handful of them.
Right.
People who really can offer the whole enchilada to an end user enterprise.
Right.
Now, you don't have to have it all as your own tools. You could do it through partnerships.
You can. You can.
But I do think that's where we're heading, and you know, and that pendulum swings. Best of breed, one throat to choke, all of that. But I think that's where we see a lot going on.
There's so much to unpack there. There's so much going
Go
on.
ahead.
You know, going back to the DevOps piece. So, you know, JFrog, if I look at it, you know, I talked about pockets of organizations, but we're like 85% of the Fortune 100, which means we have made impact in enterprise. So if we're making impact in enterprise, those customers still are dealing with those pockets of business units.
Yep.
So what we are doing now is partnering with AWS, and we're looking at how do we work together, and that's where that co-sell motion comes in, and the partnership.
Yep.
And so we sit down and we do account planning with some of our larger accounts and even some of our smaller accounts, and we look at how can we help the customer in the eyes of the customer obsession. Where can we help them save, and how do we combine our efforts? So how do we look at the long tail, and how do we move it into more strategic where they're playing, and we all sit down together and start looking at the whole platform.
That's a beautiful thing. I'm going to ask you a really hard question now.
Oh, no.
You know, and if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. But you're right. It's one of the nice things about that AWS is doing. I also know that JFrog has great relationships with Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure. And I'm not asking you to say which one you like better or which one you like working with. But are we seeing that at Google and Microsoft as well yet? Or you think AWS is kind of a little bit out ahead on this?
I think they're all aggressively moving there. And for JFrog, it's almost a perfect storm for us, right? It's like we are, multi-partner company.
Sure.
We have different integration points with each. We have relationships with all. But there are differences within the ecosystem itself. I think AWS has done a really great job of including the channel, traditional channel. I think that they've done a really good job with MSPs. You look at Microsoft, and they are basically looking at their partner program as the cloud partner program. So they're almost kind of like resell is secondary, but what is at the forefront really is influence.
Right.
And you're starting to see, this is where I see the change of partnership. So you could have 5 different touch points in your account of different partnerships. And so how are you rewarding them? And I think Microsoft is doing that.
I mean, look, you've been in the industry like I have. Microsoft always had a great partner channel program. That's what made them, well, a lot made them what they are, but that was one of their big things was, I mean, they had and they still do. They have an amazing partner in channels and the marketplaces. Google's probably a little newer than both Amazon and Microsoft to this world.
Oh, no, they're doubling down in co-sell. We see a lot of aggressive movement. And I think the past few years of their movement into more enterprise contracts and more enterprise selling, I worked with SAP for like 8 years, and a lot of the executives went over there, and there's a lot of like enterprise with them in the infancy stage, with AWS, completely different companies.
Oh yeah. No, in 2016, 17, when they were first starting, GCP, or GPC.
GCP.
Yeah, it was almost an experiment then. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to go for they're Google. They could do $1 billion of experiments.
I'm laughing because I was working with the employee number 3 when I was at GCP, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're, you're just looking at where they're at with the partnerships. But it just, like I said, it's completely changed.
Yeah, no, they're real. Look, they're a top 3. I think the real battle is who's going to be 4.
Yeah, that's,
you got your friends at IBM and Red Hat.
Yeah, I do.
Oracle and a bunch of others. Anyway, hey, for people who say, you know what, either I'm a JFrog customer or I'm on AWS and maybe we want to look at JFrog, maybe we want to sit down and have this discussion that you're talking.
Absolutely. So,
what's the on-ramp?
The on-ramp really, we have a lot of customers still migrating, and that's the reality. And in that migration, if you're moving over to cloud, you're definitely going to think about security, and you're going to think about your DevOps platform. So what we're doing is we're sitting down and we're looking at how do we construct something together, and so that could be in the form of credits and professional services, and so and even.
So, but did they go to AWS or their cloud provider of choice, or do they come to JFrog? If they come to JFrog, where do they come?
Well, they actually go through we work a lot with our sales team. So my group at JFrog, we manage all the alliance relationships. I also provide the strategy for marketplace, and I have co-sell specialists, but more or less like cloud sales specialists. And we are kind of a member of the team and very similar like a solution engineer, and we are coming in to give them kind of the AWS way of how to work together, and we bridge that gap between pulling in the partners like a channel model, and then we actually do account planning. We do account planning sessions, and so I literally have a few people. Their sole job is to set up meetings and make introductions and make sure that we're hosting those meetings, because that's really where the magic is led, and us really planning so we can go have a conversation with the customer.
I love it. Great stuff.
Yeah.
How long have you been with JFrog?
4 months.
Okay. We won't tell Shlomi. He's not watching this. So compared to some of these other companies, what do you think?
Oh, I feel at home.
Do you?
I really feel at home. And, Red Hat really was, with OpenShift, and I actually learned about JFrog when I was working within the ISV group. And I got to be more on the developer side. So it's really nice to be back here. And the spirit of the company reminds me a lot of Sun. So I feel like I found a home.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Christine Pucci here. on Techstrong TV. We're at AWS reInvent. We are going to take a break, and we'll be back in a bit.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, welcome. Mitch Ashley. We are here at KubeCon North America in Detroit, Detroit City, Motor City. So we're having great. We're on our second day of live streaming interviews, and we have some more fantastic guests line up. My next guest is from Tenable, Shantanu Gatani. Welcome.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, good. You're director of product management with Tenable?
That's right. Yeah, I've been with Tenable a little over a year now. It's exciting times at the company, absolutely. Yeah.
It is. Boy, we were just chatting. I know Tenable from the original open source days, and it becoming a company, and
absolutely.
With Ron and all the history that it has. So I'd love to talk about, we don't have to go back to the origin story, but I'd love to talk about the shift that Tenable's made into the world of software, because I grew up with Tenable as a vulnerability on devices and the software on devices and servers and endpoints.
Yeah. I mean,
but this is a different world for Tenable.
Totally. Way back in grad school, I used to be red teaming and blue teaming, that kind of good stuff, right? And I used to use Nessus and all of the tools that came along with that. But if you think about it, right, Tenable a decade ago sort of pioneered the way in IT vulnerability management, right? I mean, that's what Tenable's been known for, and that's where we've made our muscle. But now, I mean, if you're looking at the more recent attack management security organizations, right? I mean, Tenable's now absolutely pioneering our way into exposure management, right? So Tenable's made some very strategic moves in the last couple of years. And the new leadership really has brought in all of the right pieces to be able to take a look at the entire modern attack surface, and then be able to manage the exposure in that. Yeah, so it's very, very exciting times. Tenable's really evolved into a large platform, a security platform. Absolutely.
Well, part of that is the evolution of Tenable One. Was that announced about a year ago? Or
no, Tenable One's very new.
That's new.
Yeah, very new. October is just this October is when we launched.
Happened?
It just happened. Absolutely.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
I foresaw that it was going to happen a year ago. That's how I knew. No, I'm just kidding. Well, congrats on the announcement in October.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about it.
So Tenable One is all about exposure management, and before talking about what the product does, I'd love to establish what exposure management really kind of looks like, right? Not just for cloud, not just for Kubernetes, but across the board. Your attack surface now includes everything from operational technology, right? Control systems, all the way to identity, all the way to cloud, all the way to devices, right? The hybrid attack surface, right, if you will. So as part of that, instead of being reactive, right? I mean, security has always been reactive, right? We want to move to a more proactive world. We want to be in a place where we're anticipating threats and blocking them before they happen, right? And putting up the right shields. So that's one major part of it, right? The other big part of it is sort of breaking down these silos, right? Over all of my career, right? Security has always been, right? Somebody takes a look at one piece, somebody's taking a look at another piece, right? We all have a lot of the data. We all have all of the information, but have we been able to effectively contextualize that? Have we been able to effectively correlate that, right? That's always been a challenge. So you bring that into one single pane of glass. You're able to take a look at all of the different sensors, all of the different aspects of security, and correlate that data. So you kind of help break down silos, and you help establish better communication, right? I mean, I kind of think of this in threes. you talk about visualization, right? Find everything. You can't protect what you don't know. You can't protect against what you don't know, right? So visualize everything, contextualize everything, so you know what are the pieces that you need to hit on first, what are the pieces that you need to protect against first, and then democratize, right? So visualize, contextualize, democratize. Democratize is, make better decisions faster through better communication, right? Understanding everything and making sure that people know, providing them the right tools to solve problems.
Talk a little bit about how you see Tenable fitting into the sort of flow of how we create software now, right? Because security needs to happen at all levels, whether it's a microservice, a container, operating system, virtual image, whatever it might be. We have so many things, so many places where their vulnerabilities can either come in from an outside source, like a Docker hub that somebody submits that might have a poor configuration that didn't get caught, or our own code. How do we insert Tenable and Nessus and all the tools?
Absolutely.
Into that?
It's a great question. So let's take a look at the life cycle, if you will, right? I mean, you always have things that are running that you need to protect, right? Where your crown jewels are, where your data is, where your infrastructure is, right? You always have your runtime. But how did things get there, right? If we just put that in perspective or in context of cloud, things start now in a very different fashion than they used to, right? I mean, anybody can push code to production. They can change infrastructure. They can change application. So there's an entire sort of life cycle here that needs to be managed, and it can't just be at the end of the day, hey, I'm just getting ready to push my button to get everything into prod, and oh hey, Mr. Security or Miss Security, please take a look, make sure that we're good to go, right? So it can't just be that. You have to absolutely be involved at runtime, make sure that everything that you have across, let's say, hybrid cloud, right? I'm a cloud guy, so hybrid cloud, right? Make sure that you have a good solid view of everything there. But then, remediate that, fix the problems that you find, contextualize and remediate, right? So you have to protect that. But then you kind of start looking at, how do I scale, right? How do I get to a place where I find flaws before they become faults and are eventually exploited because they're vulnerabilities, right? So that's part of the whole democratization process, and eventually, the industry term around that is shift left, right? Mm-hmm. You move things, you move your detections earlier and earlier and earlier. You find a common language in which your ops folks and your developers and your security folks can talk, and I like to say that common language is policy. You make sure that the people who really understand security can author, those policies, that they can establish, hey, here are the things that you need to make sure you do or you don't do, right? But then others who, I was a developer, right? Part of my life was making sure that all of my stuff is conformant, and that was the part that I liked the least about being a developer, right?
I'm sure that's number one on your hit list, right? Maybe
somebody's stopping me.
List,
somebody's stopping me from getting my stuff out working, right? So, but now, I as a developer, or thankfully I'm not a developer anymore, but developers need to be able to just know that, hey, what I'm writing here may not be the best defaults, right? I mean, we heard so much about, just in the keynote yesterday, number of vulnerabilities in containers are rising. They're up 60%, 300 vulnerabilities, 30% of them are critical, per container. That's staggering numbers, right? How do you prevent against that just at runtime? I mean, you're going to be doing whack-a-mole forever. So you got to eventually be able to help the developer figure that out quickly, easily, and fast, and help solve that problem. And that's where we come in. Obviously, we have a full tool set for cloud security at runtime, both looking at vulnerabilities as well as misconfigurations in one single place, so you can then better prioritize and figure out, again, right, what's my exploitability, what's my impact for any given single resource, and solve for that first, right? Reduce that mean time to remediation so you can solve your problems fast. That's runtime. But then you take all of that same expertise and start saying, right, hey, engineering team, these are the core principles that you need to adhere to. And oh, by the way, we are able to plug into your IDEs so that as you're writing your IAC, you see the little squiggly lines that tell you, may not be wanting to open everything up to the public cloud, right? So that's kind of how you get into that whole life cycle and help solve problems before they become problems, like real problems.
But I think that's a big shift for the entire security industry, is having to make, some have made it already, is going from kind of point in time scanning, or filtering things, to being part of a workflow that's automated, and security can define or help put in what the policies are, what conformity we need to have around certain security aspects. But the flow is the flow, and it happens without impeding the flow.
That's right.
Or at least services an issue at the right time so somebody can do something about it, as opposed to way out at the end when, by the time you report the vulnerability, it may have been replaced already, right?
Exactly.
So you're reporting something that's not even there, or serverless apps for that matter.
Absolutely.
Tell us about sort of the open source world and kind of things that Tenable's doing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So Tenable's been known for our sort of vulnerability research, right? And being first and the best in understanding vulnerabilities, publishing them, getting the community to know about them, solve them, right? So now Tenable's again taking that leadership role. We've formed an alliance with 5 other inaugural members. It's really exciting, Tenable Research Alliance, and as part of that, our agenda really is to be able to help customers understand vulnerabilities right at the same time as they're being announced. So vendors working together, making sure that we understand and provide plugins and provide scripts for solving for that. So that's a really cool initiative that Tenable's recently launched. And on the cloud side, Tenable, when they acquired the cloud security company that's now part of Tenable, that came with TerraScan, right? So we're the original creators, authors of TerraScan. It's one of the most engaged communities around infrastructure as code scanning. We're polyglot code scanning. We provide out-of-the-box policies, and it's a pretty vibrant community. It's actually trending on GitHub just yesterday when I checked. So it's pretty cool tool. Really amazing community that's around it. We absolutely intend to nurture it and continue growing that community. And keep that space of thought leadership when it comes to infrastructure as code scanning. So yeah, I absolutely encourage everybody to check it out, contribute, come find us. It's really good stuff.
Great, and folks can still find you at tenable.com?
Absolutely, absolutely,
You've been for a while. And it's good to see, love Ron and respect all the things that he did with the company. It's good to see, with the change in management, Tenable continuing to flourish. And
absolutely.
Wish you the best. Thanks for coming by today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Having fun talking about Tenable. Go check it out. Wow, Nessus days. We're talking a while ago here. So good time. Hey, we're having a great time here at KubeCon, talking with some fantastic folks, and we've got some more people lined up. So stay tuned. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
I told you we'd be back. We're back. Here we are at KubeCon 2020 in Detroit City, Motor City. We're back. Having more great conversations. I'm really excited about this because we're going to talk about really developer productivity. So I'm joined by Justin Riak, Field CTO with Cradle, right?
That's right. Yeah, thanks, Mitch. I'm really happy to be here talking to Techstrong. So.
It's great to talk with you. We talk about DevOps all the time, but developer tools aren't necessarily DevOps tools always, right? I mean, we have our own capabilities and suites of tools that we use, whether we're doing DevOps or not. I mean, it fits within that environment, but developers are such a valuable resource, and they're not just a widget to produce X amount of work, but we want to make sure we're not wasting their time on stupid stuff. They're able to do the stuff that they do really well.
Absolutely. It's funny to me that for all of the progress that we've made with DevOps over the last 5 years or so in terms of productivity for organizations, and when you can tell how firmly rooted DevOps practices are in practices that have come before it. I love drawing on, I call it the ancient business wisdom of the 70s and 80s, but things like the theory of constraints and the work of Eli Goldratt and how that would fold into different ways of thinking about productivity. We've made all of these huge leaps, and yet we've completely ignored these still massive sort of extant bottlenecks that are just hiding in plain sight in the developer experience. Why, after all of this progress, do we still talk to developers who are waiting an hour for a test cycle to complete?
Yep.
Or spending entire days trying to diagnose things like flaky tests? So it's funny to me. We made all of these leaps forward, and yet in some ways sort of left behind like the essential component of all of this, which is the person actually sitting there writing code. So
maybe they should be automating DevOps workflows, and I mean those are important too. But I'm curious. So tell us about Gradle and what you do, what your focus is first, so we make sure folks know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most people know us as the Gradle build tool, which is the open source part of our business. And we do employ about 50 full-time engineers who work on Gradle build tool as part of the open source project. We also have a completely separate product called Gradle Enterprise, which is a set of enabling technologies that promote this practice of developer productivity engineering, which is, you're really starting to hear more about this. It's emerging out of the Bay Area, but companies like Netflix have been practicing this for about 5 years. LinkedIn followed up pretty shortly after Netflix, so it's still a relatively new process. But effectively what we're doing is providing acceleration and observation and analytic technologies that'll focus specifically on improving developers' ability to sort of stay in their flow state, right? So removing unnecessary toil from the developer, like waiting 45 minutes for a test cycle to complete, or like dealing with tests that are flaky or non-deterministic. So this separate product, it's named Gradle Enterprise, which we struggle a little bit sometimes with that naming, because you look at it and you're like, oh, what is this, like the open core model for Gradle? Is this like Gradle Plus? And it's actually a completely separate tool. It integrates with Gradle, but it also integrates with Maven and brings feature parity and all of the same type of productivity improvement technologies to Maven that we brought to Gradle, as well as the Bazel build tool.
By the way, total aside, you've made it. I mean, Goldrat is not around anymore, but his book, The Goal, is now in a graphic novel.
I have it. I have it on my bookshelf. Yeah. Well, it's one that I really like to recommend to folks who are kind of coming into this space specifically around productivity, because at the end of the day, the whole inventory cost throughput model, I mean, it's an excellent model. The models in general, anytime that you can use the laws of physics to try to predict behavior within an organization, I love that approach, because you can't break the laws of physics. So it's a very reliable way, once you apply the right features to the right equations, to be able to say, this business is either going to succeed or this new practice is going to be good for the business. But what we all have in common, these practices that have stuck around and really stood the test of time and become mainstream practices, is that one thing. Do they decrease cost and increase throughput in every case? And if they do, it's a winner. So
one of the things that I've always found is people who don't write software kind of don't understand what kind of mental state you have to kind of get into to be productive. And I was equated to, it's like writing a book. If you were going to work on the next page of a book, you don't just start writing. Kind of have to get yourself back into the story, understand where you were, pick up from right there, and then you can be productive. And that context shift of waiting for that 45 minutes, going and working on 2 or 3 other things, there's another, it can be 15, 20 minutes just to get back to where you were to take the next step. And so that productivity isn't just that 45 minutes. It can be the 15 minutes on side of it, and you do that 4 or 5 times a day and you're not getting any work done.
The brain has actually been mapped. I don't know if you've seen some of these experiences, but while developers are sitting there writing code.
I have not seen that.
You should check it out. It's really interesting. And it's this wonderful sort of ecstatic soup of left brain and right brain activity happening at the same time. What you're talking about is a state of creative flow, right? And that's a big part of efficiency. And we talk a lot about this in the practice of developer productivity engineering. We talked about a 45-minute build time, but what about the toxicity of a 10-minute build time? Even in that 10 minutes, the developer doesn't have any time even to pay that context switch tax that you pay, right? So, I mean, you've got this flow state where you're creatively solving problems. You're looking at a problem, you're visualizing it, you're trying to solve it, and then you've got this scientific analytics side of the work where you're then sort of making this hypothesis with the build tool chain. Hey, did the code that I just wrote adequately deal with this problem that I visualized in my head? And then we wait for the build tool chain in that dialogue to give us some kind of feedback that we've done the right thing. And so if we have a feedback coming in 30 seconds, a minute, right? We're good. We're staying in our flow state. We're happy. We're where we want to be as developers. But even the 10-minute crawl, 10 minutes, you can't do anything, right? I mean, what are you going to do? You might check emails for a second, you may come back and abandon the work entirely, but either way, you're out of your flow state, right?
Well, you may squirrel down one of those paths completely, and now you're really starting over.
No, exactly. But this is really what the process is all about. It's looking very closely at the value stream that's zoomed in just to the experience of writing code again, and then figuring out where are these opportunities for developers to be pulled out of their flow state, and then doing something about it, using technology to actually do something about it. And it amazes me, I speak to a lot of different audiences about this subject, and I always ask one question that really shouldn't be so provocative, but it is, who in the audience is tracking local build times? Who in the audience is actually aggregating up how long developers are sitting there waiting for their projects to complete? And it's still just crickets. Nobody. Like, nobody's even looking at this one metric. And it's fascinating to me because that one metric really is, I think, the best quantifier to developer experience. And if no one's really looking at this, then how can we possibly hope to improve it, right? 3,000-year-old adage, what gets measured gets improved, but it's as true now as it was back then, and it's a metric that I think the whole industry has just kind of gotten inured to this problem, where it's like, no, this is just what it means to write code. You have to deal with these occupational hazards of the job. You're going to deal with long build times. You're going to deal with the inconsistent or unreliable build tool chain. But I think our argument is like, it doesn't have to be that way, right? We can use technology to improve this.
Talk about theory of constraints. There's a constraint right there. Right?
Absolutely, and it's becoming a primary constraint. But I think it's absolutely, none of this is to try to demean the great progress that has been made through DevOps tooling and a DevOps mindset and a philosophy. I love that mindset. It's really important. And if you look at some of the biggest blockers to productivity and throughput for a business that we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it made sense that a lot was being lost in productivity and just the act of deploying the software or trying to enforce quality and security. But now that we've done a lot of good work to improve those problems, the primary constraint has shifted even further left. And now we're dealing with the basic stuff, like, again, idle wait times and unnecessary toil.
So you're telling me we've taken Build Friday and carved it up into a bunch of little pieces happening all the way through the week. We're still waiting for those builds.
Imagine that. Small, frequent, incremental change sets, which allows us to refine our work more often, right? Exactly. I mean, the more we can ask for that feedback and the more often, and with the smaller change set, that's the deeper psychology of what happens here. I mean, I think it's like obvious to say, okay, it's great that developers aren't wasting time waiting for code to build. But what really happens? Well, when developers know they are only going to wait 30 seconds, maybe a minute for something to complete, or even less than that ideally, well, they're likely to build more often, more frequently, push smaller change sets, which is going to mean it's going to be easier for them to figure out if they've broken something because they're dealing with a smaller amount of code. Down the line, when we actually push that code, it's going to be a smaller change set, less merge conflicts. So there's all these cascading impacts that come out of this, just improving this, just this one metric. So.
It seems, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying, but it seems like build time should be a resource that you could easily add more resource to, right? Whether it's local or distribute or put it in the cloud or some combination. You're not stuck where you are. I mean, you can get more resource to help with that.
Absolutely, and it's not even necessarily a question of using more resources, although a combination of this is really good. So many build systems are still not as efficient as they could be. So one of our acceleration technologies is just build caching, which is different than dependency caching. It's not like a artifact repository, it's not like a JFrog or a Nexus or something like that. It's instead it tasks outputs from individual phases of a code build. So that if you are, for instance, making a small incremental change to this part of the build and you haven't impacted all of these other areas, you don't have to rerun those parts of the build again. We also have predictive test selection, which was incubated at Facebook and Google and published in an academic paper back in 2019, uses a machine learning model to take a look at a corpus of tests that need to be run by the build system, but it then takes a look at the history of changes that have been made to the source code and what those changes have done in the past to the test set, and makes a prediction. It says, okay, well, there's really a very low likelihood that if you run this test, it's going to produce any valuable output for you, so don't run it. And developers already do this manually. They'll go and I don't need to run that test. But now this takes even that part of the thought process out of it. So we can make the builds more efficient, and then where we still need the processing power, absolutely, we can then distribute them. So our test distribution approach, kind of this accelerator approach that we've got right now, will take any tests that still need to be run after benefits from caching and benefits from the predictive model and run those in parallel across multiple elastically scaling agents in Kubernetes. So it's a combination of using the resources as efficiently as possible And then where we still need those resources, making sure that we can take advantage of things like elastic scale.
Work on the part of the
parallel
problem that really
processing.
needs worked on. Let
Absolutely.
the rest reassemble, right?
Yep.
And we only talk about the part of the code that doesn't ever get executed. That's a whole nother conversation. Well, Justin Riak, Field CEO with Gradle, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was a great
I hope you
conversation.
have a great show too, and we need to have you come back.
I would love that. Yeah, I would love that.
We need to really get more into this because I think, the developers world is fascinating and they do such cool stuff and great work, and it's always fun to look at what's happening inside that process.
And the time is now. I mean, right? It's you've probably heard the statistic. I'm sure it's been thrown around that we are now living in a 65% digitally transformed global GDP.
Well, I believe it. Yeah.
I mean, so that we have so much. We have this debt of code that needs to be written, and it's about time that we really focused on developer happiness and developer joy, which will lead to better productivity.
We're now in the business strategy, not in the back office.
I love
moved
that.
up.
There you go.
That's awesome.
I love
Thank
that.
you, Justin.
Thank you.
Hey,
Mitch.
we will be back here real soon. Yeah, hang tight. We'll be back real quick. We got more great conversations just like we had with Justin. So same bat channel, same bat station. Don't go away. We'll be here.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. We'll be back again on Thursday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.